Tonight we talk about dying. Not the clean kind. Not the kind where a hero falls in battle and the camera fades to black, and the audience is left with a sense of noble sacrifice, and the quiet understanding that the fallen died for something that mattered. That kind of dying exists in Warhammer 40,000, in the heroic last stands and the noble sacrifices, and the whispered final words that the novels sometimes grant their protagonists. But it is not what we are here to discuss. It is not what keeps the soldiers awake at night. It is not what makes the veterans go quiet when someone asks them about their worst deployment. We are here to discuss the other kind. The kind that makes you wish you had died cleanly. The kind that makes the simple mercy of a bolt round to the head, a fraction of a second of pressure and then silence, then darkness, then whatever waits on the other side of a death that was at least quick, seem like the gentlest gift the universe could bestow. The kind that the galaxy's worst inhabitants have spent millennia perfecting, refining, elevating into forms of suffering so elaborate and so prolonged that they transcend mere cruelty and become something closer to art. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is not a place where people die well. It is a place where death comes in flavors, in degrees, in varieties so numerous and so inventive that a comprehensive catalogue would require more pages than the administratum's entire annual census. People die in this universe by the billions, daily, in ways that range from the brutally mundane to the cosmically horrifying, and the gap between the best death you can hope for and the worst death you can imagine is so vast that the human mind cannot hold both concepts simultaneously without flinching. Tonight, we are going to try anyway. We are going to catalogue the worst ways to die in Warhammer 40,000. Not the quickest, not the most common, not the most strategically significant, the worst. The deaths that the lore describes in enough detail to make your skin crawl. The deaths that the characters in the novels and the codexes and the game supplements react to with horror. And remember, these are characters who live in a universe where genocide is a policy option and exterminatus is a Tuesday. If a space marine, a genetically enhanced killing machine who has spent centuries wading through blood and gore and the screaming remnants of entire civilizations, finds a particular method of death disturbing, then that method of death is worth examining. There is a hierarchy of death in the 41st millennium, an unofficial ranking that the soldiers of the Imperium discuss in hushed tones during the quiet moments between engagements, when the adrenaline has faded and the reality of their situation has settled in. At the top of the hierarchy, if you can call it the top, is the clean death, the bolter round, the las beam, the instantaneous, painless obliteration that leaves nothing to suffer. A Space Marine's bolter kills by detonating inside the target's body, and the detonation is so violent and so complete that the victim's nervous system does not have time to transmit the pain signal before the brain that would have received it ceases to exist. This is the best death that the 41st millennium has to offer, and it is reserved, for the most part, for the enemies of the Imperium's finest warriors. Everyone else gets something worse. Below the clean death is the quick death, the chainsword wound, the plasma burn, the melter blast that vaporizes a limb and leaves the victim to bleed out in minutes. Quick deaths are painful but finite. The suffering has a definable duration. It begins, it escalates, and then it ends, and the ending, however agonizing the moments before it, is an ending, a cessation, a full stop. Below the quick death is the slow death, the gut wound, the radiation sickness, the gangrenous infection that the field medicae cannot treat because the supplies ran out 3 battles ago. Slow deaths take hours, days, sometimes weeks. The suffering accumulates. The body deteriorates. Hope fades. And the dying soldier, lying on a cot in a field hospital or propped against a wall in a bombed-out hab block, watches themselves die by degrees and wonders, in the quiet moments between the pain, whether there is a point at which death becomes preferable to the process of dying. Below the slow death is everything else, the things we are here to discuss. The deaths that transcend the categories of quick and slow and enter a realm of suffering that has no temporal limit, no physical boundary, no merciful shutdown mechanism. The deaths that the galaxy's worst inhabitants have spent millennia developing, refining, and perfecting. Close your eyes if you like. This one is going to be deeply, thoroughly, comprehensively unpleasant. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is, in the most fundamental sense, a universe that has been designed to produce suffering. The Chaos Gods feed on suffering. The Warp is sustained by suffering. The Imperium is built on suffering. The Tyranids produce suffering as a byproduct of their consumption. The Necrons produce suffering as a consequence of their technology. The Orcs produce suffering because suffering is fun. The Drukhari produce suffering because suffering is food. There is no escape from suffering in this universe. There is no safe haven, no neutral zone, no place where a sentient being can exist without being subject to the galaxy's relentless, omnidirectional hostility. The best you can hope for is to minimize your suffering, to die quickly, to avoid the attention of the things that make dying slow, and to be forgotten fast enough that no one comes looking for your body. This is not a universe that was designed for human habitation. It is a universe that was designed for human exploitation. A cosmic machine that feeds on the raw material of sentient experience and converts it into the energy that sustains the warp's monstrous inhabitants. The humans who live in this universe are not citizens. They are not residents. They are fuel. And the machine does not care whether the fuel is comfortable. With that context established, let us begin with the one that everyone thinks of first. The one that the galaxy's youngest and hungriest residents have turned into a biological process so efficient that it makes industrial rendering look gentle by comparison. Let us begin with the Tyranids. The Tyranids do not kill you for strategic reasons. They do not kill you for ideological reasons. They do not kill you because they hate you, or because you have offended them, or because you possess something they want to take. The Tyranids kill you because you are made of biomass. And biomass is food, and the Tyranids are always, at every moment, in every tendril of every hive fleet, hungry. The horror of a Tyranid death begins before the Tyranids arrive. It begins with the shadow in the warp, the psychic presence of the hive mind pressing down on the world it has targeted, smothering the astropathic communications that are the Imperium's only means of faster than light messaging, cutting the planet off from any possibility of reinforcement or rescue. The people on the surface feel it as a weight, a dread, a nameless anxiety that settles into the population like a fog and does not lift. Psychers feel it worst. Some go mad. Some kill themselves. Some simply stop functioning, their minds overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing presence of an alien intelligence so vast and so cold that their human consciousness cannot coexist with it. Then the organisms arrive. The first wave is the small ones: gaunts, hormagaunts, termagants, gargoyles, Creatures that are individually fragile by the standards of the galaxy's deadlier inhabitants, but that come in numbers that make individual fragility irrelevant. They pour across the landscape like a flood, a living wave of chitinous bodies and bioacid and razor-sharp talons. And they do not stop. They do not slow down. They do not pause to consolidate or regroup or reassess. They just keep coming, wave after wave, organism after organism, driven by the hive mind's relentless hunger and utterly indifferent to their own casualties. A soldier facing a Tyranid swarm shoots until their weapon overheats. Then they shoot some more. Then the weapon jams, or the ammunition runs out, or the power cell dies. And the creatures are still coming, and the soldier draws their combat knife. And they fight well, because Imperial soldiers always fight well, and then the creatures reach them. And the knife is not enough. Death by Tyranid bioweapon is its own category of horror. The flesh borer, one of the Tyranids' most common ranged weapons, does not fire conventional ammunition. It fires living organisms, beetle-like creatures that have been bred to burrow into flesh. The beetle strikes the target at high velocity, penetrates the skin, and then begins to eat its way inward, chewing through muscle and organ tissue, consuming the victim from the inside out while the victim is still alive, still conscious, still capable of feeling every moment of the process. A single flesh-borer round is enough to kill, but the killing takes time, and the time is filled with a kind of pain that conventional weapons do not produce. Because conventional weapons destroy tissue, flesh-borer beetles consume it. The devourer is worse. The devourer fires a burst of worm-like organisms that are too small to see individually, but that arrive in such numbers that the effect is like being engulfed by a cloud of living acid. The worms strip flesh from bone in seconds, eating through armor, through clothing, through skin, through muscle, consuming everything organic and leaving behind a skeleton that is clean and white and still wearing the expression of horror that the victim's face held in the last moments before the flesh was eaten away. But the true horror of a Tyranid invasion is not the killing. The killing is merely the preparation. The true horror is what comes after. The digestion pools. After the Tyranids have conquered a world, after the resistance has been broken and the defenders have been killed or consumed, the Hive Fleet begins the process that it came for. The planet itself is consumed. Tyranid organisms dissolve the world's biomass, everything organic, into a nutrient-rich slurry that is collected in vast digestive pools. These pools are not metaphors. They are literal lakes of biological acid, enormous reservoirs of dissolving organic matter that the Tyranids pump back up to the hive ships in orbit through capillary towers. Biological structures that grow from the planet's surface and extend into space like nightmarish straws, sucking the liquefied remains of an entire world into the fleet's bio-reserves. Everything goes into the pools, the forests, the oceans, the soil, the animals, the buildings, at least the organic components, and the people. Every human being on the planet who has not been consumed during the fighting, every civilian who hid in a basement, every child who was too young to understand what was happening, every wounded soldier who could not retreat fast enough, all of them end up in the digestion pools. Some of them are alive when it happens. The acid does not kill instantly. It dissolves tissue over a period of minutes, sometimes hours, depending on the concentration and the volume. A human body dropped into a Tyranid digestion pool experiences the progressive dissolution of its external tissues first, the skin, the superficial muscles, the connective tissue, before the acid reaches the internal organs and the nervous system finally, mercifully shuts down. The duration of this process is not consistent, because the acid's concentration varies across the pool, and a person who falls into a dilute region may survive in a state of unimaginable agony for far longer than a person who falls into a concentrated one. The hive mind does not care. The hive mind does not distinguish between a person who has been dead for an hour and a person who is still screaming. Both are biomass, both are food. Both will be liquefied, pumped into orbit, and reconstituted into new Tyranid organisms that will be deployed against the next world on the fleet's trajectory. This is the Tyranid death. It is not personal, it is not malicious, it is not cruel in any intentional sense. It is simply biological, a process as impersonal and as inevitable as the digestion of food by any other organism. The Tyranids are eating you. They do not hate you for being food. They do not enjoy your suffering. They do not even notice it. You are calories. You are protein. You are amino acids and trace minerals, and the biological raw material from which new Tyranid creatures will be grown. And somehow that impersonality makes it worse. Because at least when a chaos cultist tortures you, they are acknowledging your existence. At least when a Dark Eldar flays you alive, they are treating you as a person, albeit a person whose only value lies in their capacity for suffering. The Tyranids do not even grant you that much. To the Tyranids, you are not a person. You are not even a victim. You are a nutrient. But the Tyranids, for all the horror of their consumption, are at least quick about it. A Tyranid invasion from first contact to final digestion takes weeks or months. The suffering, while terrible, has a definable endpoint. The planet is consumed. The biomass is harvested. The fleet moves on. It is over. There are things in the galaxy that are not quick about. There are things in the galaxy that have made suffering into a purpose, a philosophy, a religion. And they live in a city that exists outside of space and time, in the spaces between reality, in a dimension of cruelty so pure and so refined that the chaos gods themselves regard its inhabitants with something approaching respect. But we are not done with the Tyranids yet, because the Tyranids have refined killing into so many biological variations that a complete catalogue would fill a codex of its own. The Ripper swarms are perhaps the most psychologically disturbing of the Tyranid death methods. Rippers are small individually, about the size of a large rat, serpentine organisms with razor-sharp mandibles and an appetite that is disproportionate to their size. They come in swarms of hundreds, thousands, covering the ground like a living carpet, and they consume everything they encounter. A soldier who falls in the path of a Ripper swarm does not die from a single wound. They die from 1,000 tiny ones. 1,000 small mouths biting, tearing, chewing, each one removing a small piece of flesh, the swarm consuming them from the extremities inward. The hands going first, then the forearms, then the upper arms, while the victim is still fighting, still screaming, still trying to pull the creatures off with stumps that no longer have fingers. The bioacid sprays that certain Tyranid organisms deploy are another form of horror. The acid is not a manufactured chemical. It is a biological secretion, produced by specialized glands within the Tyranid organism. And it is remarkably effective at dissolving organic matter. A spray of bioacid on exposed skin produces immediate catastrophic tissue damage, the flesh bubbling and dissolving on contact. The pain so intense and so sudden that the victim's nervous system often shuts down before the brain can process what has happened. For those whose nervous system does not shut down, the experience is a full-body immersion in agony. Every pain receptor in the affected area firing simultaneously as the acid eats through skin, muscle, and bone. The psychological dimension of a Tyranid invasion is its own form of cruelty. The shadow in the warp, the psychic blanket that the hive mind casts over its targets, does not merely cut off communication. It induces a pervasive, inescapable despair in the population. A sense of hopelessness that goes beyond rational fear and into the territory of psychic compulsion. People stop fighting, not because they have been ordered to stop, not because they have been physically subdued, but because the shadow has convinced them, at a level below conscious thought, that resistance is pointless, that the swarm is inevitable, that the digestion pools are waiting, that the only question is how long the dying will take, and the only mercy available is to ensure it takes as little time as possible. Soldiers who survive contact with the shadow in the warp report nightmares for years afterward. Some never recover. The memory of that psychic pressure, that crushing, suffocating awareness of the hive mind's attention, stays with them like a scar that never heals. A wound in the mind that no Medicaid can treat and no amount of faith can cure. And then there are the genestealers. Genestealer infection is a death that takes generations. A person who is implanted with a genestealer's genetic material does not die. Not immediately. They are altered. Their DNA rewritten by the alien genetic code, their mind subtly adjusted to serve the cult that the genestealer patriarch has established. They breed. Their children carry the alien taint, each generation more obviously mutated than the last, until the fourth generation produces pure genestealers who are physically indistinguishable from the alien organisms that started the infection. The horror of genestealer infection is not physical. It is existential. The infected person does not know they are infected. They do not know that their thoughts are being influenced, that their loyalty has been redirected, that the love they feel for their family and their community has been hijacked by an alien intelligence that is using them as breeding stock. They live their lives. They work. They pray, they raise their children, and all the while the alien code is rewriting their descendants, producing the hybrid organisms that will, when the hive fleet arrives, rise up and tear apart the civilization that nurtured them. When the uprising comes, when the cult reveals itself and the hybrids emerge from the underhive with weapons and hunger and the cold, alien intelligence of the patriarch directing their every move, the infected parent watches their children transform into something that is not human, and the parent's mind, caught between the alien compulsion that tells them this is right and the human instinct that tells them this is monstrous, shatters. That is the genestealer death. Not the death of the body, but the death of everything you believed about your life, your family, and yourself. The genestealer death is a slow poison, a death that you do not feel happening because the dying is generational, spread across decades and bloodlines, a corruption so patient that the victims do not recognize it until the uprising reveals what they have become. And by then, the dying is over. The person who was infected is dead in the only way that matters. Their will, their identity, their humanity has been consumed by the alien code that rewrote their descendants. The body may still be breathing, but the person is gone, replaced by something that wears their face and speaks with their voice and loves their family and serves the patriarch and waits, with the infinite patience of the hive mind, for the fleet to arrive. Now, let us move from the biological to the intentional, from the hunger that does not hate to the cruelty that does. Let us talk about the Dark City. Let us talk about Commorragh. The Drukhari are the galaxy's foremost experts in suffering. This is not an exaggeration. It is not a dramatic flourish. It is a statement of objective fact, confirmed by every species that has encountered them, including species that have their own considerable traditions of cruelty. The orcs, who enjoy violence the way other species enjoy music, find the Drukhari disturbing. The Chaos Gods, who are sustained by suffering and feed on misery, regard the Drukhari's techniques with something resembling professional interest. The Imperium of Man, which has institutionalized brutality to a degree that would make a medieval torturer weep with admiration, considers the Drukhari the single most terrifying enemy that a human being can face. Not because they are the most powerful, but because capture by the Drukhari is worse than any death the Imperium can inflict. To understand why, you need to understand what the Drukhari are and why they do what they do. The Drukhari are Eldar. They are the descendants of the ancient Eldar Empire that fell during the birth of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess and sensation. When Slaanesh was born, screaming into existence from the collective psychic excess of the Eldar species, it consumed the souls of almost every Eldar in the galaxy. The Craftworld Eldar survived by fleeing on their world ships and adopting a disciplined, ascetic lifestyle that denied Slaanesh the emotional excess it feeds on. The Exodites survived by retreating to primitive worlds and living simple lives close to the land. The Drukhari survived by doing neither. The Drukhari live in Commorragh, a vast city realm that exists in the Webway, the extra-dimensional network of tunnels and passages that the ancient Eldar used for faster than light travel. Commorragh is hidden from Slaanesh's gaze by the Webway's dimensional barriers, but hiding is not enough. Every Drukhari soul is still claimed by Slaanesh, and the Dark Prince is patient. Slowly, imperceptibly, Slaanesh drains the soul of every Drukhari, sipping at their life force, pulling them toward the oblivion that awaits them in the warp when they die. The Drukhari have found a way to fight this drain. They replenish their souls by absorbing the suffering of others. Pain, terror, anguish, despair, the raw, unfiltered psychic energy of a sentient being in the extremes of torment provides the Drukhari with the sustenance they need to keep Slaanesh at bay. Every scream, every sob, every moment of agony that they inflict on their victims is food, spiritual nourishment that fills the void in their souls and pushes back the slow, cold death that Slaanesh promises. This means that the Drukhari do not torture for pleasure, though they certainly take pleasure in it. They torture for survival. Every Drukhari, from the lowest gutter slave to the highest Archon, needs suffering the way a human needs food and water. Without it, they wither. Their souls dim, Slaanesh's grip tightens, and eventually, inevitably, they die, and their soul is consumed by the Dark Prince in an eternity of torment that makes even the Drukhari's worst excesses look merciful. The Homunculi are the masters of this art. The Homunculi are the Drukhari's flesh sculptors, their biological engineers. They're artists of agony. They are ancient beings, some of them tens of thousands of years old, who have spent their impossibly long lives studying the mechanics of pain, with a dedication and a rigor that would impress any scientist and horrify any ethicist. They understand the nervous system of every sentient species in the galaxy. They know exactly which nerves to stimulate, which chemicals to inject, which surgical modifications to make to produce the maximum possible suffering in their subjects without killing them, because killing them would be wasteful. A dead victim produces no more pain. A living victim can produce pain indefinitely. The homunculi have developed techniques that allow them to keep their victims alive through injuries and modifications that should be fatal. They can flay a person alive and keep them conscious and pain sensitive for months. They can remove organs one by one, replacing their functions with mechanical substitutes that maintain the body's viability while maximizing the nervous system's capacity for suffering. They can regrow tissue that has been destroyed, restoring the victim to a state of physical integrity so that the process can begin again. A cycle of damage and repair that can continue for years, for decades, for lifetimes. Some victims of the homunculi have been in their laboratories for centuries. Think about that. Centuries of uninterrupted torment, with no possibility of death, no possibility of unconsciousness, no possibility of the merciful shutdown that the human nervous system usually provides when pain exceeds the body's capacity to endure. The homunculi have eliminated that shutdown. They have found ways to keep the pain receptors firing, to keep the consciousness active, to keep the victim aware and suffering through every single moment of an experience that has no end. The Talos and the Chronos are the homunculi's most visible creations. These are pain engines, massive constructs that are part machine and part tortured flesh, designed to harvest suffering on an industrial scale. A Talos moves across the battlefield, its bladed limbs carving through enemy soldiers, and within its armored shell the remains of its victims are processed, their pain extracted, their suffering distilled into the psychic energy that feeds the Drukhari. A Kronos is worse. A Kronos does not merely harvest pain from the battlefield. It drains the life force of its victims directly, sucking the vital essence from living beings and distributing it to the Drukhari warriors around it, healing their wounds and replenishing their fading souls with the stolen vitality of their enemies. A soldier who falls near a Kronos does not simply die. They are emptied, their life force pulled from their body like water from a sponge, leaving behind a husk that is technically alive but that has been drained of everything that makes life worth living. But the battlefield horrors of the Talos and the Chronos are quick by Drukhari standards. The truly terrible fate is to be captured, to be taken alive, to be dragged back to Comora, to the laboratories of the homunculi, and to begin a new existence as raw material for the Dark City's insatiable hunger. The captives are called slaves, but the word does not begin to capture what they experience. A slave in the Imperium works. A slave in Comora suffers. That is their function. That is their purpose. They exist to produce pain, and the Drukhari have elevated the extraction of that pain to a level of sophistication that 10,000 years of practice has refined into something that transcends mere torture and becomes a form of applied metaphysics. Captives in the homunculus laboratories are modified. Their pain receptors are enhanced, multiplied, extended into parts of the body that do not normally experience pain. Their healing is accelerated so that injuries can be inflicted and healed and inflicted again without the cumulative degradation that would eventually kill a normal victim. Their consciousness is chemically locked into a state of hyper-awareness, so that they cannot retreat into unconsciousness, cannot dissociate, cannot find any mental escape from the physical reality of what is being done to them. Some are transformed into grotesques, their bodies reshaped by the homunculi's arts into massive, muscular monsters that retain enough consciousness to understand what has happened to them, but not enough autonomy to resist. The homunculi make sure they remember. The homunculi sometimes give them mirrors. The mandrakes deserve a brief but harrowing mention. Mandrakes are Drakari shadow creatures, beings that exist partly in real space and partly in a dimension of darkness that even the Drakari find unsettling. They move through shadows as though the shadows were doorways, stepping from one pool of darkness to another, appearing behind their victims without sound, without warning, without any indication that they were there until the cold, black hands close around the victim's throat. A person killed by a mandrake does not simply die. Their body heat is drained. Their life force is consumed. The cold that the mandrake brings with it is not merely physical. It is spiritual, a cold that penetrates to the soul, a chill that extinguishes the warm ember of consciousness, the way a wet cloth extinguishes a candle flame. The victim feels the cold moving inward, through their skin, through their muscles, through their bones, reaching for the center of their being, and when it finds that center, the victim's consciousness gutters and goes out. And what remains is a frozen, drained husk that the mandrake discards without interest. The mandrakes are feared even in Comorar, in a city where every inhabitant is a predator and every shadow might contain an enemy. The mandrakes are the shadows themselves made hostile, the darkness given teeth, the void between the lights turned into a hunting ground for creatures that do not need to eat but choose to kill anyway. Because the killing feeds something inside them that is older and darker than the Drakari's soul thirst, and that even the homunculi do not fully understand. Others are transformed into living furniture. Comorar is decorated with its victims, chairs made from contorted human bodies, maintained in stasis, alive and aware. Lamps powered by the bioluminescence of modified flesh. Walls covered in the stretched and preserved skins of previous captives, some of whom are still alive beneath the display, conscious within their flattened forms, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. The technology that allows this is ancient Eldar technology, the same kind of biological and psychic engineering that produced the craftworld Eldar's spirit stones and infinity circuits. The Drakari have turned it to darker purposes, using it to extend the duration of suffering beyond anything that biology alone could sustain. A victim in a homunculus's laboratory is not subject to the normal limits of the human body. They are subject to the limits of Eldar technology, which are, for all practical purposes, infinite. There is no rescue from Comorar. The Dark City exists in the webway, accessible only through hidden portals and guarded passages that the Imperium cannot locate and would not be able to assault even if it could. The captives of the Drakari are as unreachable as the dead, and in many ways they envy the dead. Because the dead have stopped suffering. The Warhammer community's official summary of death in Comorar includes a category that does not score points in their tongue-in-cheek scoring system, because it technically does not result in death. Being kept alive indefinitely as a morbid furnishing. The summary notes that this is actually much worse than dying. and leaves it at that, because some things do not benefit from detailed description. The arenas of Commorragh are where the Drukhari's hunger for suffering becomes entertainment. The Crucible is Commorragh's greatest amphitheatre, a vast, tiered structure that can hold hundreds of thousands of Drukhari spectators. In its fighting pits, captives from across the galaxy are forced to fight, to die, and to provide the spectacle that the Dark City's jaded population demands. The fighters are given weapons. Sometimes they are given nothing. Sometimes they are pitted against other captives. Sometimes they are pitted against the Drukhari's own gladiatorial fighters, the witches, who are the most skilled melee combatants in the galaxy, and who fight with a grace and precision that makes the butchery look almost beautiful. Lelith Hesperax, the Queen of Knives, is the Crucible's most celebrated gladiator. She fights with nothing more than a pair of knives and her own preternatural speed and skill. And she has killed more opponents in the arena than most Drukhari warriors have killed in their entire careers. To be selected as Hesperax's opponent is considered an honor in the Dark City's warped value system, because the death she delivers is quick and clean by Commorragh standards. Her opponents die fast. They die with precision. And they die in front of the largest audience in the Dark City, which means that their suffering, brief as it is witnessed by hundreds of thousands and feeds that many more Drukhari souls. The captives who are not selected for the arena face a different fate. They are distributed among the cabals, the warrior cliques that form the Drukhari's military and political hierarchy, and they are used as the cabal's leadership sees fit. Some become servants. Some become experimental subjects. Some are simply tortured, methodically and professionally, by specialists who have spent centuries studying the anatomy of every sentient species in the galaxy, and who know exactly how much pain each species can sustain before the body gives out. The Drukhari have a concept they call soul thirst. It is the constant, gnawing hunger that drives their need for suffering. A Drukhari who does not feed, who does not witness or inflict pain for an extended period, begins to wither. Their features sharpen. Their skin tightens. Their eyes sink into their skulls. They become gaunt, desperate, driven by a hunger that is not physical but spiritual, a craving for the psychic energy that suffering produces. A starving Drukhari will do anything to feed, and the anything includes acts of cruelty so extreme that even other Drukhari find them excessive. This is why the captives of Commorragh are so valuable. They are not merely victims, they are provisions. They are the stored food that keeps the Dark City's population alive between raids, the reserves that tide the Drukhari over during the periods when fresh captives are not available. A captive who can be kept alive and suffering for an extended period is more valuable than a captive who dies quickly, because a long-lived captive produces more suffering over their lifetime. And more suffering means more food. And more food means more survival. The homunculi understand this calculation better than anyone, and their skill at keeping captives alive and suffering has made them the Dark City's most important industry. They are not merely torturers, they are farmers. They cultivate suffering the way an agri-world cultivates crops, maximizing yield per victim, developing new techniques to extend the productive lifespan of their subjects, and innovating constantly in pursuit of purer, more concentrated forms of agony. This is the Drukhari death. Or rather, this is the Drukhari undeath. the death that never comes, the suffering that never ends. The eternity of agony that the galaxy's oldest and most sadistic species has spent 10,000 years perfecting. And yet, terrible as it is, the Drukhari's torture is at least intentional. It is directed. It has a purpose, however horrifying that purpose may be. There are things in the galaxy that inflict suffering without intention, without direction, without purpose. Things that twist and break and unmake their victims not because they choose to, but because that is simply what they are. There is one more fate that deserves mention before we leave the world of biological horror and enter the realm of cosmic horror. And it is the fate of the ghost ships. Ghost ships are vessels that were lost in the warp and returned. Sometimes they return centuries after they disappeared, emerging from the Imperium with their hulls intact and their systems functioning, but their crews long dead. Their corridors filled with the evidence of whatever happened to them during their centuries in the warp. The logs are usually unintelligible. The walls are usually covered in writing, in blood, in substances that the investigating teams cannot identify. The crew's remains, when they are found, are usually in positions and conditions that the investigating teams do not include in their official reports. Sometimes the ghost ships return with their crews still alive. This is worse. The crews of these ships have experienced time differently than the rest of the galaxy. They may have been in the warp for what felt like hours, but what the external universe measured as centuries. Or they may have been in the warp for what felt like centuries, but what the external universe measured as hours. Either way, they are changed. Their minds have been exposed to the raw immaterium for a duration that their sanity was not designed to sustain, and the exposure has left marks that no Medicae can treat and no confessor can absolve. They speak of things they saw, things that the warp showed them, truths about the nature of reality, about the existence of the Chaos Gods, about the future of humanity, about the answer to questions that they never asked but that the warp answered anyway, in detail, in vivid and unforgettable detail, and the answers broke something inside them that cannot be repaired. The Imperium quarantines these crews. It debriefs them. It extracts whatever useful information can be salvaged from their broken minds. And then it disposes of them. Because a person who has seen the raw truth of the warp is a person who cannot be allowed to return to normal society, because the truth they carry is contagious, and the Imperium cannot afford to let it spread. There is one more Chaos God whose deaths deserve attention before we leave the realm of the biological and enter the realm of the cosmic. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, does not kill the body. He kills the mind. A person touched by Tzeentch's power does not experience physical torment. They experience knowledge. Too much knowledge. Knowledge that the human brain was not designed to contain. Information about the nature of reality, the true history of the universe, the future that awaits them, the possible futures that might have awaited them if they had made different choices, and the certain future that will await them now that they have glimpsed the architect of fate's designs. The knowledge is true. This is what makes it unbearable. If Tzeentch's revelations were lies, the mind could reject them. If they were delusions, the mind could recover. But the knowledge that Tzeentch imparts is accurate, verifiable, and completely devastating. Because the truth about the Warhammer 40,000 universe is worse than any lie could be. A person who receives Tzeentch's gift of knowledge learns things about the nature of the Chaos Gods, about the fate of human souls, about the true relationship between the warp and real space, that render their previous understanding of reality obsolete. They learn that the Emperor is not what the ecclesiarchy says he is. They learn that the Chaos Gods are not what the Inquisition says they are. They learn that the universe operates according to rules that no imperial doctrine has ever accurately described, and the rules are terrible, and the rules are permanent, and there is no force in the galaxy that can change them. The knowledge does not kill instantly. It erodes. The person goes about their daily life, carrying the weight of what they know, unable to share it because anyone they told would either not believe them or would be destroyed by the same knowledge. And the weight gets heavier with each passing day. They look at the people around them, the people who do not know, who still believe that the Emperor protects, who still believe that faith has power, who still believe that the universe has meaning, and they feel a compassion so intense that it is indistinguishable from grief. They know the truth, and the truth is that the truth does not set you free. In the 41st millennium, the truth is a prison that has no walls, no doors, and no possibility of escape. Tzeentch considers this his greatest gift. The Changer of Ways delights in the irony of a being that has received exactly what it asked for: knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and that has been destroyed by the gift. Not through any cruelty on Tzeentch's part, but through the simple, unavoidable consequence of knowing too much in a universe that is best survived in ignorance. Let us talk about what happens when reality itself turns against you. Let us talk about the warp. The warp is not a place. It is an experience. And the experience is madness. The Imperium, the realm of chaos, the dimension that exists alongside reality like a shadow that has learned to bite, is the single most dangerous environment in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Not because of the creatures that live there, though those are terrible enough. Not because of the Chaos Gods who rule it, though their power is beyond mortal comprehension. The warp is dangerous because it is wrong. It is fundamentally, ontologically incompatible with the reality that human beings were built to inhabit. And exposure to it does not merely kill the body. It destroys the mind, corrupts the soul, and unravels the basic assumptions about the nature of existence that allow a sentient being to function. A Geller field failure is the nightmare scenario. Every ship that travels through the warp is protected by a Geller field, a device that projects a bubble of real space physics around the vessel, keeping the warp's influence at bay. The technology is ancient, poorly understood even by the Mechanicus tech priests who maintain it, and it works on principles that no living human being can fully explain. When it works, the crew of a warp-traveling vessel is relatively safe, though even under normal conditions, warp travel is deeply unsettling. The crew members experience nightmares. Vivid, recurrent nightmares that feel more real than their waking hours. Dreams in which the walls of the ship are transparent and the things in the warp outside are visible, pressing against the Geller field like faces against glass. Watching the crew with expressions that are not quite curiosity, and not quite hunger, and not quite malice, but something worse than all three. The crew learns to sleep in shifts, to keep the lights on, to talk constantly, to fill the silence with prayer and conversation and the background hum of the ship's systems. Because the silence, the moment when the ship goes quiet and the crew stops talking and the only sound is the faint, sub-audible vibration of the Geller field generator. is the moment when the nightmares are strongest and the warp's presence is most oppressive. When the Geller field works, the crew of a warp-traveling vessel is safe, sealed inside their bubble of normality, while the madness of the Imperium swirls around them. Visible through the viewport as a roiling, screaming chaos of color and form that the human eye cannot process, and that the human mind should not attempt to interpret. When the Geller field fails, the bubble pops, the warp floods in. What happens next defies coherent description, because coherent description requires a stable reality in which words have consistent meanings, and a stable reality is precisely what ceases to exist when the Geller field goes down. The accounts that survive, from the rare ships that have experienced field failure and somehow survived, are fragmented, contradictory, and haunted by the knowledge that the people who produced them were, by the time they were rescued, no longer entirely sane. Daemons materialize aboard the ship. Not one or two, hundreds. They pour through the breach in reality like water through a cracked hull. Lesser daemons flooding the corridors, tearing through crew members with claws and teeth and appendages that the human visual system interprets differently every time it looks at them. Greater daemons manifest if the breach is severe enough. Entities of such power that their mere presence warps the physical structure of the ship, bending metal, melting bulkheads, turning corridors into impossible geometries that loop back on themselves and lead to places that do not exist. The crew mutates. Raw warp energy flowing through the ship's interior transforms human flesh in real time, bones lengthening, skin splitting, organs rearranging into configurations that serve no biological purpose but that cause exquisite pain. Crew members who were human moments ago become something else. Their bodies twisted into shapes that reflect the warp's chaotic nature, their minds shattered by the experience of feeling their own anatomy rewrite itself without their consent or control. Some are fused to the ship. Their bodies merge with the metal of the deck plates, their flesh flowing into the steel like water into a sponge, bonding at the molecular level, creating hybrid structures that are part human and part machine, and entirely agonized. These fused crew members are conscious. They can feel the ship around them, feel the engines running, feel the other crew members walking on the deck plates that their bodies have become part of. They cannot move, they cannot speak, they cannot die. They simply exist, embedded in the structure of the vessel, aware and suffering for as long as the ship endures. Time breaks down. In the warp, time does not flow in a single direction. It loops, skips, reverses, and fragments. Crew members experience moments of their past repeating, moments of their future intruding, moments from timelines that never existed and now, briefly and horrifyingly, do. A sailor might relive the moment of their mother's death 1,000 times in the space of a minute, or experience a future in which they are already dead and watch their own corpse decompose from the inside. Or find themselves trapped in a moment of pure sensation that stretches into eternity. A single second of fear or pain or despair expanded until it fills the entire universe and there is nothing else. Has never been anything else, will never be anything else. This is what happens when reality breaks. This is what the warp does to the unprepared and the prepared. The psychers, the navigators, the people whose minds are trained to interact with the Imperium, fare only slightly better, because their training gives them the tools to understand what is happening to them, and understanding in this context is its own form of torture. But warp exposure is not limited to Geller field failures. The warp reaches into real space in other ways, through warp rifts, through demonic incursions, through the psychic abilities of untrained psychers who tear holes in reality without meaning to. And the effects on the people caught in these breaches are just as devastating. Demonic possession is one of the warp's most personal horrors. A daemon that possesses a human being does not simply occupy their body. It devours their soul from the inside, consuming the human consciousness piece by piece while it wears the body like a suit. The possessed person is still in there, somewhere, trapped inside their own skull, watching through their own eyes as the daemon uses their hands to kill, their mouth to speak blasphemies, their body to perform acts that the human mind cannot process without fragmenting. Some possessed individuals are aware of what is happening to them for the entire duration of the possession. They feel the daemon's presence in their mind like a tumor, a mass of alien consciousness that is consuming their thoughts, their memories, their personality, replacing everything that made them human with something that is not human and has never been human, and finds the remnants of their humanity amusing in the way that a cat finds a mouse amusing. The daemon does not hurry. It savors the possession, drawing out the process of consuming the host's soul, because the host's suffering, the desperate, futile resistance of a human consciousness fighting to retain its identity against an entity that is ancient beyond comprehension. Fighting a daemon directly is its own kind of death, even when you survive the fight. The Grey Knights, the secret chapter of Space Marines that is dedicated to combating demonic threats, suffer a spiritual damage with every engagement that accumulates over the course of their careers. The psychic exposure, the close quarters contact with entities of pure warp energy, the experience of looking into the face of something that should not exist, and seeing it look back with recognition and with hunger, erodes the Grey Knight's soul in a way that their training and their faith can slow but cannot stop. Grey Knights who serve for centuries develop a hollowness, a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion that is not physical but spiritual. They have fought too many daemons. They have been too close to the warp too many times. The accumulated weight of their exposure has worn grooves in their souls, thin spots where the warp's influence seeps through, and the Grey Knight must spend increasing amounts of mental and spiritual energy maintaining the barriers that keep the seeping at bay. Some Grey Knights break, not many. The chapter's selection and training process is rigorous enough that breakage is rare, but rare is not never. And a Grey Knight who breaks, whose barriers fail, whose accumulated warp damage finally overwhelms their defenses, becomes something that the chapter would rather not discuss. They become a vulnerability, a breach, a potential conduit for the very forces they have spent their career fighting. The chapter handles these cases quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. The broken Grey Knight is removed from service and processed in a manner that the chapter's records do not describe in detail. It is a death of sorts, but the death of the body is secondary to the death of the spirit that preceded it. When the possession is complete, when the last fragment of the host's consciousness has been consumed, the daemon discards the body. What remains is a shell, a human form that is technically alive but that contains nothing recognizable as a person. The eyes are open, the lungs breathe, the heart beats, But there is no one home. The person who lived in that body is gone, consumed, digested by an entity that has moved on to its next host without a backward glance. Then there is the Chaos Spawn. The Chaos Spawn is what happens when the gifts of the Dark Gods become a punishment. The Chaos Gods reward their followers with mutations, alterations to the body and mind that grant power, strength, and abilities beyond the human norm. A Chaos Champion who serves Khorne might receive arms that are strong enough to tear through ceramite armor. A servant of Nurgle might receive a body that is immune to pain and disease. A devotee of Slaanesh might receive senses so acute that they can perceive the emotions of everyone around them. These gifts are the currency of chaos, the rewards that keep the champions fighting and the cultists worshipping. But the gifts are not free, and they are not always given in moderation. A champion who receives too many mutations, who is touched too deeply by the warp's transformative energy, undergoes a catastrophic metamorphosis. Their body loses all structural coherence. Mutations pile upon mutations, each one more extreme than the last until the original form is completely lost. Limbs multiply. Organs relocate, bones melt and reform in configurations that serve no biological purpose. The face, the last remnant of the person who once existed, is swallowed by the spreading chaos of flesh, replaced by a mass of eyes, mouths, tentacles, and sensory organs that perceive the world in ways that no human mind was built to process. The result is a chaos spawn, a gibbering, thrashing mass of mutated flesh that is driven by the pain of its own existence to attack anything it encounters. Chaos spawn are sustained by warp energy rather than conventional biology. They do not need to eat, though they consume anything that touches them through some form of absorption. They do not sleep. They do not rest. They simply exist, thrashing and screaming in the spaces between battles, their consciousness reduced to a single overwhelming sensation: agony. Because the person is still in there. This is the worst part. The consciousness of the original champion, the person who served the gods, who fought and killed and worshipped in pursuit of power and glory, is still present inside the Chaos Spawn. It has not been destroyed. It has been buried, trapped inside a body that it cannot control, perceiving the world through senses that it cannot interpret, experiencing the constant, unrelenting pain of a body that is in a permanent state of uncontrolled mutation. The champion is aware. They know what has happened to them. They know what they have become, and they cannot do anything about it, because the body no longer responds to their commands, and the mind no longer has the tools to formulate commands that a body made of warp-mutated chaos flesh could execute. The Chaos Spawn is immortal, in the most terrible sense of the word. It does not age. It does not decay. It does not wear out. It persists, thrashing and screaming, in the warp-saturated environments of the Eye of Terror or the Great Rift, for as long as the warp energy that sustains it continues to flow. This could be centuries. It could be millennia. It could be forever. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, is associated with the most spawn transformations, because mutation and change are his fundamental domain. A champion of Tzeentch who displeases the architect of fate may find their gifts accelerating beyond their body's ability to absorb them, their flesh erupting into a cascade of uncontrolled change that does not stop until the champion is gone and only the spawn remains. Some scholars of the ruinous powers suggest that this is Tzeentch's idea of a joke, Others suggest that Tzeentch does not have ideas of jokes, because Tzeentch does not have ideas that beings of finite consciousness can categorize. Nurgle's gifts deserve their own examination, because the plague god's brand of death is unlike anything else in the galaxy. Nurgle does not kill quickly. Nurgle does not kill cleanly. Nurgle's deaths are slow, progressive, and characterized by a quality of physical degradation that transcends mere disease and enters the realm of cosmic horror. A Nurgle plague does not merely make you sick, it transforms you. It turns your body into a garden, a living ecosystem of decay and regeneration, where the organisms that are consuming you are also sustaining you, keeping you alive and aware through the process of your own decomposition. A person infected with one of Nurgle's plagues experiences a slow dissolution of their physical form. Their flesh softens, bloats, and begins to decay while they are still using it. Their organs liquefy, one by one, each failure compensated by the warp energy that sustains the infection, keeping the victim alive and conscious through conditions that should kill them instantly. Their skin splits, revealing the mass of biological corruption beneath, the teeming colonies of bacteria, fungi, and warp-spawned organisms that have colonized their body and are converting it, cell by cell, from a human being into a vessel for Nurgle's blessings. The victim feels all of this. They feel their flesh rotting, they feel their organs failing, they feel the things growing inside them, the parasites and the fungi and the bacterial colonies that are eating their body from the inside out. And the cruelest part, the most characteristically Nurgle detail, is that after a while, the pain stops, not because the body has stopped deteriorating, because the victim has accepted it, because Nurgle's influence does not merely corrupt the body, it corrupts the spirit. The victim begins to find a kind of peace in their decomposition, a warmth, a comfort, a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves, a community of decay that welcomes all living things into its embrace. This is Nurgle's genius. He does not need to torture his victims into submission. He loves them into it. He offers them the one thing that no other Chaos God offers: acceptance. Acceptance of their imperfections, acceptance of their mortality, acceptance of the inevitable decay that awaits all living things, and the victims, worn down by the suffering, exhausted by the pain, grateful for any relief at all except they embrace the plague god's love. They become his willing servants, and they spread his gifts to everyone they touch. Khorne's deaths are the simplest and, in their simplicity, perhaps the most terrifying. The blood god does not torture. He does not experiment. He does not prolong suffering for the sake of prolonging it. Khorne kills. That is all. That is everything. But the killing is performed with such overwhelming cataclysmic violence that the simplicity itself becomes a form of horror. A Khornate berserker does not use a weapon the way a normal soldier uses a weapon. A normal soldier kills to achieve an objective. A Khornate berserker kills because killing is the objective. Their chinaxes are not tools of warfare. They are instruments of worship. Every swing is a prayer. Every skull claimed is an offering. Every spray of arterial blood is a sacrament, and the berserker receives these sacraments with a fervor that transcends rational thought and enters the realm of religious ecstasy. A person killed by a Khornate berserker is not simply murdered. They are dismantled. The chinax does not cut cleanly. It tears, rips, shreds, the rotating teeth of the weapon chewing through flesh and bone and armor in a spray of gore that coats the berserker and everything around them. The violence is so excessive so far beyond what is necessary to kill a single human being, that the end result is not a body, but a collection of parts, scattered across the ground in a radius that reflects the berserker's enthusiasm rather than any tactical consideration. The World Eaters, the Chaos Space Marine Legion dedicated to Khorne, have implanted themselves with devices called the Butcher's Nails, neural implants that were originally designed by the Primarch Angron's captors on the world of New Syria. The nails stimulate the brain's aggression centers and suppress the centers responsible for empathy, compassion, and rational thought. A World Eater with active nails is incapable of complex emotion. They can feel only rage and the satisfaction of killing, and the satisfaction fades quickly, replaced by a mounting frustration that can only be relieved by more killing. The nails also cause excruciating pain when the World Eater is not fighting. The implants punish inactivity with headaches that escalate into blinding, incapacitating agony, driving the Marine to seek combat not just out of devotion to Khorne, but out of the desperate need to escape the pain that the nails inflict during periods of peace. A World Eater is, in this sense, a victim as well as a perpetrator. A person who has been neurologically enslaved to violence, and who kills not because they choose to, but because the alternative is a form of suffering that no amount of mental discipline can overcome. The people who die at the hands of the World Eaters do not care about this distinction. They are too busy being torn apart. The Bloodthirsters, the greater daemons of Khorne, represent the apotheosis of this killing philosophy. They are enormous, winged, bestial entities that embody raw, undirected violence on a cosmic scale. A bloodthirster on the battlefield is a natural disaster in humanoid form, a hurricane of blades and fury that kills everything in its path, without discrimination, without strategy, without mercy. Soldiers, civilians, allies, enemies, it does not matter. The bloodthirster kills because killing is what it is. It does not think. It does not plan. It simply destroys, and the destruction is so complete, so absolute, so overwhelming that the people who witness it from a distance and survive carry the memory like a wound that never heals. A world consumed by a Nurgle plague does not burn. It rots. Slowly, beautifully, if you have the stomach for it. And the people on that world do not die screaming. They die smiling. Because Grandfather Nurgle has told them that everything is going to be all right. And by the time they are too far gone to question the assertion, they believe him. The Necrons kill you at the atomic level. The Gorseflayer, the standard weapon of the Necron warrior, does not burn. It does not cut. It does not punch a hole through you the way a bolt round does, or dissolve your flesh the way an acid weapon does. The Gorseflayer strips you, layer by layer, atom by atom. The weapon projects an energy beam that breaks the molecular bonds holding your body together, peeling away your physical substance in sheets, like removing layers from an onion. The victim does not die instantly. The Gorse beam works from the outside in, removing the outermost layer of tissue first, then the next, then the next. A soldier hit by a Gorseflayer watches their armor dissolve, then their uniform, then their skin. They watch it happen, because the brain, protected inside the skull, is one of the last things to go. They feel their flesh being stripped away, feel the cold air on the exposed muscle beneath, feel the muscle itself begin to peel, layer after layer of their own body being erased from existence while they are still conscious. still processing the visual and sensory information that their diminishing nervous system is providing. The flayed ones are worse. The flayed ones are Necrons who have been infected by a curse, the Flayer virus, that compels them to attack organic beings and drape their skins over their own metal forms. The flayed ones are driven by a hunger they cannot satisfy, a phantom memory of the flesh they lost when the Necrontyr race underwent biotransference and had their consciousness uploaded into metal bodies 60 million years ago. They want to be alive again. They want to feel again, and they express this want by tearing the skin from living beings and wearing it like clothing, pressing the still warm flesh against their cold metal frames in a futile attempt to remember what it felt like to be organic. A person caught by the flayed ones is not killed, they are skinned. The flayed ones are precise. They do not crush or tear or destroy. They flay with a surgical accuracy that the homunculi of Comorra would admire, removing the skin in large, intact sheets that can be draped over the Necron's metallic skeleton. The victim is conscious during this process. The Necron's technology is advanced enough that the flaying can be performed without severing major blood vessels or damaging the underlying muscle tissue, keeping the victim alive and aware as their outer layer is methodically removed. The victim eventually dies of shock, blood loss, or exposure, depending on the environmental conditions. But the dying can take hours, and those hours are spent in a state of raw, unfiltered agony that the human nervous system was not designed to sustain. Every nerve ending in the body is firing. Every breeze is a scream. Every touch is a thunderbolt of pain. The victim is, in the most literal sense, skinned alive, and the phrase which has been used as a metaphor for mild discomfort in everyday language acquires a horrifying literalness in the context of a flayed one encounter. But the Necrons are not the only faction that inflicts suffering through technology. The Imperium of Man, the ostensible protectors of humanity, have their own traditions of cruelty, and some of them rival anything the Xenos races can produce. Servitorization. A servitor is a lobotomized cyborg, a human being whose brain has been partially removed and replaced with simple cogitator programming. Their body is augmented with mechanical components that allow them to perform repetitive tasks, carrying, cleaning, repairing, operating machinery. They are the Imperium's invisible workforce, humanoid machines that populate every Imperial facility from warships to manufactorums. The process of creating a servitor is not painless. The subject is strapped to a surgical table. Their skull is opened. The portions of the brain responsible for personality, memory, emotion, and higher cognitive function are removed, surgically excised, while the rest of the brain is kept alive and functioning. The subject is conscious during the early stages of this process, because the initial incisions and the opening of the skull are performed under local anesthesia rather than general, to allow the surgeons to monitor the brain's electrical activity and ensure they are removing the correct regions. The subject feels their personality being taken away. They feel their memories dissolving. They feel themselves becoming less, piece by piece, as the surgeon's tools remove the parts of their brain that make them who they are. They can feel the change happening, can feel the thoughts slipping away, can feel the emotional connections to their past, their family, their identity, their sense of self, flickering and dimming like lights being switched off one by one. And then there is nothing. The subject is gone. What remains is a servitor, a biological machine that performs its assigned tasks with mechanical efficiency and no awareness of what it once was. The servitor does not know it was ever a person. It does not remember its name, its family, its life. It simply works, and when it breaks, it is repaired or discarded, and no one mourns, because there is nothing left to mourn. Some servitors are created from vat-grown bodies, biological blanks that never had a consciousness to lose. Others are criminals whose sentence includes servitorization. And others, the ones the Imperium does not discuss, are simply people who were deemed surplus, whose labor was considered more valuable in lobotomized form than in its original, troublingly autonomous configuration. The penitent engine is the Imperium's most horrifying punishment. A penitent engine is a combat walker, a bipedal weapons platform armed with heavy flamers or buzzsaws, piloted by a human being who has been wired directly into its control systems. The pilot is not enclosed within the machine, the way a Space Marine dreadnought is. The pilot is mounted on the front, exposed, crucified on the engine's hull, their arms clamped wide, their body connected to the machine through a network of fiber-optic neural connectors and chemical injectors implanted in their spine. The pilot is conscious. The pilot is in pain. The chemical injectors flood their body with a cocktail of stimulants and pain amplifiers that keep them in a state of perpetual, agonized awareness. They can feel every impact that the engine takes, every bullet that strikes its hull, every explosion that rocks its frame. They can feel the engine's weapons firing, feel the buzz saws spinning, feel the flamers igniting. And they cannot stop it. The engine moves and fights according to its programming, and the pilot is merely along for the ride, a passenger in their own personal hell. The pilot is a heretic, someone whose crimes against the Imperium were so severe that execution, imprisonment, and even archoflagellation were deemed insufficient punishment. The penitent engine is the last resort, the final step in the Imperium's hierarchy of retribution, reserved for those whose sins require not merely death but suffering. Not merely suffering, but public suffering. Not merely public suffering, but suffering that serves the Emperor's will by destroying his enemies. The pilot cannot end their own torment. The engine's arms are designed so that they cannot reach back toward the pilot, preventing suicide by the machine's own weapons. The pilot can only die in one of two ways: in battle, killed by an enemy who happens to hit the exposed figure on the engine's front, or by the Emperor's judgment, the divine mercy of a bolt round or a last beam that finds the pilot rather than the machine. Some pilots fight for years before they find that mercy. Years of constant pain, constant combat, constant awareness that the machine they are wired into is killing people with their hands and their body and their screaming, never-ending consciousness. The archoflagellant is a variation on the same theme, though with a different operational profile. An archoflagellant is a heretic who has been surgically modified into a berserker killing machine. Their arms are replaced with cybernetic weapons, industrial shears or electroflails or new mattocks. Their spine is implanted with chemical injectors that flood their body with combat drugs on command. Their brain is fitted with a pacifier helmet that keeps them in a state of calm, barely conscious passivity until a trigger word is spoken, at which point the inhibitors release and the archoflagellant becomes a whirlwind of drug-fueled violence that attacks everything in range. The person inside the archoflagellant is still in there. The pacifier helmet does not remove consciousness. It suppresses it, filling the subject's mind with sacred images, symbols of the ecclesiarchy, pictures of saints, looped hymnals and prayer while the body waits. passive and still, for the trigger word that will release it into its next frenzy of killing. When the trigger word is spoken, the subject's consciousness surfaces, briefly, horribly, into a body that is no longer under their control. A body that is pumped full of chemicals and armed with weapons and programmed to kill until the second trigger word is spoken and the pacifier helm reactivates. The arco-flagellant does not understand what is happening. The drugs and the conditioning have destroyed their capacity for rational thought. But they feel it. They feel the killing. They feel the impact of their weapons against flesh. They feel the blood on the stumps where their hands used to be. And then the second trigger word is spoken, and the pacifier helm descends, and the sacred images return, and the hymnals resume, and the arco-flagellant goes still again, waiting in a chemical haze for the next activation. This is how the Imperium treats its own criminals. This is what humanity does to humans who displease it. And it does it not in the dark, not in secret, not in the dungeons where the worst excesses of other civilizations would be hidden. It does it in the open, on the battlefield, as a demonstration of the Emperor's justice, and the citizens of the Imperium watch and nod and say, yes, this is right, this is proper, this is what heretics deserve. There is another Necron weapon that deserves attention, the Gauss Obliterator. The Obliterator operates on the same principle as the Gauss Flayer, but at a vastly greater scale. Capable of stripping armored vehicles and fortifications atom by atom. The experience of watching a bunker dissolve around you. Of seeing the walls of your shelter peel away layer by layer. Of watching the ceiling disappear and the floor begin to erode. Of knowing that when the structure is gone, the beam will turn to you and do the same thing to your body that it is doing to the rockcrete around you, is a particular form of psychological torment that the Necrons do not intentionally inflict, but that their weapons inevitably produce. The Necron destroyers are machines that have been consumed by a hatred of all organic life so absolute that it has overridden whatever remnants of personality their biotransference left intact. A destroyer does not merely kill, it extermines. It pursues organic life with a single-minded intensity that makes even the Tyranids look casual by comparison, and its weapons. Heavy Gauss cannons and enmitic exterminators produce death on an industrial scale. A destroyer formation moving through a populated area leaves nothing alive, not because the destroyers are thorough, but because their hatred of life is so complete that the concept of a living thing existing in their vicinity is an affront that their fractured minds cannot tolerate. The Destroyer Lord, the Commander variant, is perhaps the most disturbing of all the Necron entities. A Destroyer Lord has been consumed by the hatred so thoroughly that it has become, in the words of the Necron Codex, a monument to nihilism. It does not want to conquer, it does not want to rule, it wants to destroy. All of it, everything. Every living thing in the galaxy, and possibly in every galaxy, and possibly in every dimension, and possibly in every timeline, until there is nothing left but silence and darkness, and the cold satisfaction of knowing that the job is done. The warp talons of the Chaos Space Marines offer a death that combines the physical and the metaphysical in a way that no other Chaos unit achieves. Warp talons are raptors, Chaos Space Marines equipped with jump packs, who have spent so long in the warp that their weapons have become extensions of the Imperium itself. Their lightning claws do not merely cut flesh, they cut reality. A wound from a warp talon's claws opens a tear in the barrier between real space and the warp, and through that tear the victim can see what lies on the other side. The warp pours through the wound, not in the catastrophic, ship-wide manner of a Geller field failure, but in a small, personal, intimate way, showing the victim the true nature of the Imperium, giving them a glimpse of the dimension of madness that exists parallel to the reality they have always known. The glimpse is usually enough to destroy the victim's sanity before the physical wound has time to kill them. They die screaming, not from pain but from knowledge, from the shattering revelation that the universe contains things that they were never meant to see, and that, having seen them, they can never unsee. The Helldrake is a Chaos Space Marine fighter aircraft that has been corrupted by the warp into a daemon engine shaped like a dragon. The Helldrake does not merely strafe its targets with conventional weapons. It breathes fire, a stream of warp-tainted flame that burns the body and the soul simultaneously. A person caught in a Helldrake's flame does not simply burn. They are consumed by a fire that follows them into the afterlife, burning their soul in the warp as their body burns in real space, ensuring that death provides no escape from the agony. The Warp Smith is a Chaos Tech Priest, a former servant of the machine god who has turned their knowledge of technology to the service of the ruinous powers. Warp Smiths create daemon engines, modify Chaos vehicles, and maintain the corrupted technology that the Chaos Warbands depend upon. They also have a particular talent for technological torture, using their knowledge of cybernetics and their access to warp-tainted machinery to create punishments that blend the mechanical and the demonic in ways that the homunculi of Komorrah would find intriguing. A Warp Smith can fuse a person with a machine, bonding their nervous system to the control circuits of a piece of equipment, making them part of the device's operating system. The person becomes, in effect, a component, a living part of a machine that they cannot escape, their consciousness integrated into the device's functions, their pain responses linked to the machine's sensors, their suffering fueling the warp energy that powers the corrupted technology. They feel the machine's damage as their own. They feel its operations as sensations in their nervous system, the firing of weapons as jolts of agony, the movement of gears as grinding pressure in their joints, the flow of fuel as a burning sensation in their veins. The person can be removed from the machine. Theoretically, in practice, the fusion of flesh and technology is so thorough that extraction would kill the subject, which would defeat the purpose, because the purpose is not the person's comfort or survival. The purpose is the machine's function. The person is fuel. The machine is the product, and the Warp Smith does not care about fuel, only about the machinery it sustains. The Orc Pain Boys deserve a mention, though their brand of horror is less systematic and more improvisational than the Imperium's carefully codified cruelty. A Pain Boy is an Orc surgeon, which is a term that requires aggressive quotation marks, whose understanding of medicine is based entirely on enthusiasm and a willingness to experiment. Pain Boys operate on their patients, both Orc and non-Orc, with whatever tools happen to be available, which often include power drills, rusty saws, hammers, and the occasional stick of dynamite. Their surgical techniques owe more to automotive repair than to medical science, and their survival rates are surprisingly high, not because the Pain Boys are skilled, but because Orcs are so biologically resilient that they can survive injuries that would kill any other species several times over. For non-Orc captives, the The Pain Boy's operating table is a nightmare of improvisational surgery, performed without anesthesia, without sterilization, without any of the safeguards that even the most brutal Imperial chirurgeon would consider minimum standards. The Pain Boy cuts because cutting is interesting. They attach things because attaching things is fun. They remove organs to see what happens and replace them with mechanical substitutes that may or may not function and that are almost certainly not compatible with the victim's species. The results are horrifying, absurd, and occasionally fatal, though the Pain Boy always seems genuinely surprised when a patient dies, as though the concept of mortality is something they have heard about but never really believed in. The psychers who feed the Astronomicon face a death that is perhaps the most quietly horrifying in the entire Imperium. The Astronomicon is the psychic beacon that allows Imperial ships to navigate the warp, a lighthouse of psychic energy projected from Terra that is visible across the galaxy to the navigators who guide humanity's vessels through the Imperium. The Astronomicon is powered by the Emperor's will, but the Emperor cannot sustain it alone. The beacon requires fuel, and the fuel is human souls. 10,000 psychers are bound to the Astronomicon at any given time, their psychic energy channeled into the beacon, their consciousness merged with the Emperor's will, their bodies slowly consumed by the process of amplifying a psychic signal across a galaxy. The psychers do not survive the process. Their bodies wither, their minds dissolve, their souls are burned away like candle wax, consumed by the beacon's insatiable demand for psychic energy. A psyker bound to the Astronomicon lives for months, sometimes years, gradually losing themselves, gradually becoming less, gradually fading into the light of the beacon until there is nothing left. They are replaced. 1,000 souls a day are sacrificed to keep the Astronomicon burning. 1,000 psychers, gathered from across the Imperium by the black ships, brought to Terra and fed to the beacon. This has been happening for 10,000 years. The mathematics are staggering. Trillions of souls, consumed by a lighthouse to keep humanity's ships from being lost in the dark. The psychers who are selected for the Astronomicon know what awaits them. Some go willingly, believing that their sacrifice serves the Emperor, and that their souls will be received by him in death. Others go unwillingly, dragged to the binding chambers by armed guards, screaming and fighting, knowing that what awaits them is not death but dissolution. The slow, progressive loss of everything that makes them a person. Fed into a machine that does not care about their suffering and cannot be stopped, there is no glory in this death. There is no memorial. There is no record of their names. They are fuel. They are consumed. And the Astronomicon burns on, indifferent to the cost, because the alternative, the darkness, the loss of the beacon, the stranding of every Imperial ship in the warp, is worse. The black ships that collect the psychers are their own form of horror. The League of Black Ships is a fleet of specialized vessels that traverses the Imperium, visiting every world, collecting the psychers that the planetary governments have identified and imprisoned for transport. The holds of a black ship contain thousands of psychers, each one shackled, suppressed, and terrified, crammed into cells that are shielded against psychic emanation and guarded by Sisters of Silence, the anti-psyker warriors whose presence causes a psychic dead zone that makes the psyker's imprisonment even more oppressive. The journey to Terra takes months or years, depending on the ship's route and the vagaries of warp travel. During this time, the psychers in the holds experience a progressive deterioration of their mental state. They are in proximity to thousands of other psychers, each one radiating psychic energy, each one's fears and nightmares bleeding into the minds of those around them. The psychic environment in the hold of a black ship is a soup of terror, confusion, and despair, a collective nightmare that builds and intensifies as the journey continues, fed by the accumulated misery of every psyker on board. Some psykers do not survive the journey. Their minds collapse under the psychic pressure, their consciousness fragmenting into pieces that cannot be reassembled. Others survive, but are driven insane, their sanity shattered by the experience of sharing a confined space with thousands of other psychically active minds for months on end. The ones who arrive at terror intact, who still possess the mental coherence necessary to be useful, are sorted. The strongest become astropaths, their mind's soul bound to the Emperor in a ritual that burns out their eyes and leaves them blind, but grants them the psychic stability they need to serve as the Imperium's long-range communicators. The process of soul binding is not painless. The psyker's consciousness is brought into direct contact with the Emperor's presence on the Golden Throne, and the experience of standing in the Emperor's psychic gaze, of having the full, undiluted attention of the most powerful human mind in history turned upon you, is overwhelming. Many do not survive the soul binding. Those who do are changed, marked, diminished in some ways and enhanced in others, and they carry the memory of the Emperor's gaze with them for the rest of their lives. The weakest are fed to the Astronomicon, or they are processed in other ways, their psychic energy extracted and used to power the Imperium's various psychic technologies, or their bodies are rendered down in the same corpse starch processing plants that handle the Imperium's other biological waste. The weakest psykers are not even granted the dignity of a purposeful death. They are simply disposed of, their potential insufficient to warrant the resources that training and soul binding would require, their existence a minor line item in the Administratum's ledger of psychic resource management. The penal legions deserve examination alongside the servitors and the penitent engines, because they represent a different category of imperial cruelty, death as bureaucratic process. A penal legionnaire is a convicted criminal, someone whose crimes were severe enough to warrant more than imprisonment, but not severe enough or not of the right type to warrant servitorization or arco-flagellation. Instead, they are given a weapon, a uniform, and a bomb collar, an explosive device locked around their neck that can be detonated remotely by their commanding officer if they attempt to flee, refuse an order, or simply become more trouble than they are worth. The penal legionnaire is then deployed, not to safe sectors, not to defensive positions, not to any assignment where their survival is a consideration. They are deployed to the most dangerous sectors of the most dangerous war zones, sent forward into situations where regular troops cannot be risked, used as screening forces, mine clearers, distraction elements, and, in the most cynical interpretation, as ablative casualties whose deaths serve the tactical purpose of revealing enemy positions and exhausting enemy ammunition. The penal legionnaire fights because the bomb collar gives them no choice. They advance into the teeth of enemy fire because the alternative is detonation. They charge fortified positions because the officer behind them has a dead man's switch and a willingness to use it. And they die in enormous numbers, because the entire purpose of a penal legion is to convert criminal lives into tactical advantage, trading bodies for information, trading blood for ground, trading the suffering of the condemned for the survival of the useful. Some penal legionnaires survive. Some fight with such skill and such desperation that they earn their freedom, their convictions expunged, their bomb collars removed, their debt to the Imperium considered paid. These survivors are rare, hardened beyond anything that normal military service can produce, and they carry the memory of the penal legion with them for the rest of their lives. The death worlds of the Imperium produce deaths that do not require any sentient agency whatsoever. A death world is an imperial designation for a planet whose natural environment is so hostile that human survival requires constant, active effort, and where the failure to maintain that effort results in rapid and unpleasant death. Death worlds produce the Imperium's finest soldiers, because only the finest survive long enough to be recruited. The predators of death worlds are nightmares made flesh. Catachan devils, enormous insectoid creatures that can swallow a human whole. Fenrisian wolves, pack predators the size of tanks. The various toxic, carnivorous, and actively malicious flora and fauna of worlds like Catachan, where the jungle itself is trying to kill you and the jungle is very, very good at its job. A person killed by a death world predator dies in a manner that is, by the standards of the deaths we have discussed tonight, almost refreshingly natural. They are hunted, they are caught, they are eaten. The process is violent, painful, and terrifying, but it is also comprehensible. A predator is eating you because you are food. This is how the universe works. This is how it has always worked. There is no malice in it, no cruelty, no intention to cause suffering beyond what is necessary to subdue and consume the prey. Compared to a homunculus's laboratory, being eaten by a Catachan devil is practically a mercy. The mundane deaths of the 41st millennium are in many ways the most sobering. Not the spectacular deaths, not the cosmic horrors, not the daemon-fueled nightmares that fill the codexes and the novels. The mundane deaths, the ones that happen every day on every world, to people who will never appear in any story. The factory worker who inhales toxic fumes for 30 years and develops the pulmonary condition that the Medicae calls hive lung and that the worker calls dying. The soldier who catches a last bolt in the stomach during a routine patrol and bleeds out in a ditch, while the medic tries to find enough synth skin to close the wound. The child who drinks contaminated water and develops the intestinal parasite that kills more people in the underhive than all the gang wars combined. The mother who dies in childbirth because the Medicae facility in her sector has been closed for budget reasons, and the nearest functioning facility is 12 levels up and 3 sectors over, and her labor started too fast for anyone to get her there. These deaths are not dramatic. They are not cinematic. They would not make good entries in a codex or compelling scenes in a novel, but they are real, in the context of the lore as real as anything else, and they happen in numbers that dwarf the more spectacular deaths by orders of magnitude. For every person who dies in a Tyranid digestion pool, 1 million die of untreated illness. For every person who dies on a homunculus table, 10 million die of malnutrition. For every person who dies in a Geller field failure, 1 billion die of the accumulated wear and tear of a life lived in conditions that no human body was designed to endure. The mundane deaths are the galaxy's true horror, not because they are the worst, though they are terrible in their own quiet way, but because they are the most numerous, the most preventable, and the most thoroughly ignored. The Imperium does not notice them. The Administratum does not record them. The ecclesiarchy does not mourn them. They simply happen, constantly, everywhere, to everyone, and the machine keeps running, and the tithe keeps flowing, and the emperor remains on his throne, and nothing changes. Nothing ever changes. The Psykers know this. They know what awaits them when the black ship arrives. They know that their options are soul-binding, which is agonizing, service in the Astronomicon, which is fatal, or disposal, which is meaningless. There is a particular cruelty in the way the black ships collect their cargo. The Psykers are identified on their homeworlds, usually during childhood, when their powers first manifest. The manifestation is rarely gentle. A child Psyker might accidentally set their home on fire with their mind. They might cause everyone in their school to experience the same nightmare simultaneously. They might attract the attention of a minor warp entity that manifests in the family's living quarters and has to be driven off by the local militia. The manifestation terrifies everyone, including the Psyker themselves. And the terror is the beginning of a life defined by fear, isolation, and the constant awareness that their own mind is a weapon that they cannot control. The child is reported. The black ship comes. The child is taken, separated from their family, their friends, their home, everything they know, and placed in the hold of a vessel with thousands of other frightened, confused, untrained Psykers, many of them also children. The family is told nothing. They may never know what happened to their child. They may spend the rest of their lives wondering, hoping, grieving, not understanding that the child was selected for a process that will either transform them into a useful imperial servant or consume them as fuel for the Astronomicon's fire. The cruelest part is that the family, if they knew the truth, would be grateful, because the alternative, keeping an untrained Psyker in the community, is worse. An untrained Psyker is a beacon for daemons, a conduit for chaos, a walking warp rift waiting to open. The black ships are not kidnapping children. They are removing unexploded ordnance from populated areas. But that does not make the children's fear any less real, and it does not make the hold of the black ship any less dark. And they board the black ship anyway, because the alternative, remaining on their homeworld as an untrained, unsanctioned Psyker, is worse. An untrained Psyker is a beacon in the warp, a signal fire that attracts the attention of daemons, and a Psyker who attracts a daemon does not merely die. They become a gateway, a portal through which the daemon enters the physical world, and everyone around the Psyker pays the price. Everything in the Imperium is worse than its alternative. That is the justification. That is the excuse. That is the answer to every question about the Imperium's brutality, its cruelty, its willingness to turn its own people into fuel and furniture and weapons. The alternative is worse. And in the 41st millennium, the alternative usually is. Exterminatus is not a death, it is an erasure. When the Imperium decides that a world must die, it does not send an army, it does not negotiate, it does not offer terms. It sends a fleet, and the fleet deploys weapons that are designed to kill not just the people on a planet's surface, but the planet itself. Every living thing, every ecosystem, every possibility of future life. The world is sterilized, scoured, reduced to a lifeless ball of rock and ash, and the fading memories of everyone who ever lived there. There are several methods of exterminatus, and each one offers its own variety of horror. The virus bomb is perhaps the most visceral. The virus bomb deploys a biological agent, the Life Eater virus, that attacks organic matter at the cellular level. The virus does not distinguish between human and animal, between plant and fungus, between the complicated and the simple. It consumes everything organic, reducing flesh to soup, dissolving the biosphere of an entire planet, in a process that takes hours rather than the weeks or months that conventional biological warfare might require. A person caught in a life-eater virus attack does not simply die. They melt. The virus breaks down their cellular structure, liquefying their tissues from the outside in, turning solid flesh into a flowing, bubbling mass of dissolved organic matter that pools on the ground and releases gases as the biological compounds break down. The victim is conscious during the early stages, watching their hands dissolve, feeling their skin sloughing off their body, tasting the chemical tang of their own decomposition in their mouth before the virus reaches their brain, and the experience mercifully ends. The gases released by the virus, the methane and the hydrogen and the other volatile compounds produced by the rapid decomposition of an entire planet's biosphere, are flammable. When the virus has done its work, when the entire surface of the planet is covered in a layer of dissolved organic matter and the atmosphere is saturated with combustible gas, the fleet ignites it. A single incendiary round from orbit is enough. The atmosphere catches fire. The entire planet burns. The fireball scours the surface clean, burning away the residue of the virus's work, turning the dissolved remains of every living thing on the planet into ash and carbon, and the faint, lingering smell of a world that used to exist. Cyclonic torpedoes are more direct. They are essentially planetary-scale nuclear weapons, devices that crack the planet's crust, trigger tectonic upheavals, and render the world geologically unstable. The death is faster, but no less total. The people on the surface experience earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the progressive disintegration of the ground beneath their feet as the planet's geological stability collapses. Cities are swallowed by fissures. Oceans boil. The atmosphere is stripped away by the violence of the tectonic activity, vented into space along with the screams of everyone who was breathing it. There is a third method, the two-stage virus bomb, in which the life-eater virus is deployed first to dissolve the biosphere, and the resulting gas cloud is then ignited by orbital bombardment. The double death, first dissolution and then fire, ensures that nothing organic survives. Not a single bacterium, not a single spore, not a single strand of DNA that might allow the target world's biosphere to regenerate. The world is not merely killed. It is sterilized. It is rendered permanently, irrevocably dead, a ball of scorched rock that will never support life again unless the Imperium chooses to terraform it, which the Imperium almost never does. Because there are always more worlds and the Imperium does not look backward. The people on a world subjected to virus bomb exterminators do not all die at the same rate. The virus spreads from the impact point outward, its progress dependent on atmospheric conditions, population density, and the local biosphere's resistance to the pathogen. This means that the people on the far side of the planet from the impact point can see what is coming. They can watch the horizon change color as the virus approaches, watch the reports come in from cities closer to the impact, watch the vid screens fill with images of people dissolving, of cities collapsing as their inhabitants liquefy, of the advancing tide of biological destruction that is moving toward them at a rate that outpaces any evacuation. They have hours. Sometimes they have a day, and they spend that time knowing with absolute certainty that they are going to dissolve, that the virus is coming, that there is nowhere to run, because the virus is airborne, and the atmosphere carries it faster than any ground vehicle can move, and the ships that might have evacuated them are either gone or have been ordered to maintain a quarantine cordon that no one is allowed to breach. The final hours on a virus-bombed world are a study in the extremes of human behavior. Some people pray, some people loot, some people kill themselves, choosing a quick death over the slow dissolution that the virus promises. Some people hold their families and wait. Some people try to build shelters, sealed rooms with independent air supplies. And some of these shelters work, briefly, until the virus finds its way through a crack in the seal or the air supply runs out and the occupants have to open the door. And some people, a surprising number, simply go outside and watch. They stand in the open air and watch the tide come in, watch the world they knew melt around them, and they wait for the dissolution to reach them. It is not courage. It is not defiance. It is the exhaustion of a species that has been told for 10,000 years that the Emperor protects, and that has discovered in the final hours of their world's existence that the Emperor's protection has limits. Exterminatus is the Imperium's final answer. It is deployed against worlds that have fallen to chaos, that have been overrun by Tyranids, that have been infected by a genestealer cult that has progressed beyond the point of surgical removal. It is not deployed lightly, at least not by the standards of the Imperium, which is to say that a great deal of paperwork is required and several senior officials must sign off on the decision before the fleet is authorized to fire. But it is deployed. Regularly, the Imperium has destroyed thousands of worlds over the course of its 10,000-year history, and each destruction represents billions of lives ended in a single administrative decision. The people on those worlds, the civilians, the children, the workers, the farmers, the people who were simply living their lives when the Imperium decided that their world was no longer worth saving, died not as casualties of war but as variables in an equation. Their deaths were calculated. Their suffering was budgeted. Their world's destruction was filed, documented, and archived, and the administrator moved on to the next item on its agenda. The Night Lords kill you slowly, and they make sure you see it coming. The Night Lords are a Chaos Space Marine Legion, the sons of Conrad Kurzay, the Primarch who grew up in the Underhive of Nostramo and who believed, with a conviction that was itself a form of madness, that fear was the only force that could impose order on a chaotic universe. The Night Lords do not fight for chaos in the way that the World Eaters fight for Khorne or the Death Guard fight for Nurgle. They fight for themselves, for profit, for survival, and for the pleasure of terrifying their victims before killing them. The Night Lords are theatrical. They announce their presence. They broadcast the sounds of their approach through hijacked Vox channels, the clank of ceramite boots, the whine of chainswords, the screams of previous victims played on loop. They light their armor with the skins of the people they have killed, stretched and preserved and mounted on their shoulder pads and backpacks, the faces of the dead staring out at the living with expressions that the Night Lords have carefully arranged to maximize their psychological impact. They do not kill efficiently. Efficiency is not the point. The point is fear. The Night Lords want their victims to be afraid before they die, want them to spend their last hours in a state of mounting terror, knowing that the killers are coming, hearing them in the corridors, seeing the evidence of what they have done to others, and knowing with absolute certainty that the same fate awaits them. The Night Lord's approach to killing is methodical in its own way. They select their victims carefully. They study their target's fears, their vulnerabilities, their relationships. They kill a victim's friends first, making sure the victim knows about each death, making sure the victim sees the evidence, making sure the anticipation of their own death builds with each passing hour. The Night Lords understand that fear is a resource that must be managed. Too much fear too quickly produces numbness. The mind's emergency shutdown that prevents the victim from experiencing the full impact of what is happening. The Night Lords want their victims fully conscious, fully aware, fully capable of appreciating the artistry of their own destruction. They skin their victims. This is their signature. The skins are stretched, preserved, and displayed on the Night Lord's armor, a gallery of faces that stare outward from shoulder pads and chest plates and trophy racks, each face frozen in the expression it wore at the moment of death. The Night Lords choose their skins carefully. They prefer faces that show fear, despair, the dawning realization that help is not coming, and that the only remaining question is how much the dying will hurt. The Night Lords also broadcast. They hijack the Vox networks of the worlds they attack and transmit the sounds of their work. The screaming, the pleading, the wet sounds of blades meeting flesh. The sound carries further than the weapons, reaches further than the warriors, and it does more damage than both. Entire cities have surrendered to Night Lords' forces based on nothing more than the broadcasts, because the population, hearing what the Night Lords did to the last city that resisted, decided that submission was preferable to experiencing it firsthand. Conrad Kurz's screaming gallery was the distillation of this philosophy. The Primarch maintained a collection of victims in his fortress, people who had been subjected to such precise and prolonged torment that their screams had been reduced to a constant, low-frequency keening that echoed through the corridors of his stronghold. The gallery was not a punishment. It was a decoration. The screaming was ambient music. The suffering was wallpaper. And the people who produced it were kept alive for as long as the Night Lord flesh artists could sustain them, which, given the resources available to a Primarch, was a very long time indeed. Fabius Bile, the Clone Father, the primogenitor, is the Imperium's nightmare given a name and a scalpel. Bile was once the chief apothecary of the Emperor's Children Legion, a scientist of extraordinary talent whose dedication to the advancement of human biology exceeded the boundaries of ethics, sanity, and eventually humanity. He is, in the 41st millennium, the galaxy's foremost genetic engineer, a man who has been modifying, enhancing, and experimenting on human and post-human subjects for 10,000 years, without the inconvenience of a conscience. Bile's experiments are not performed for the benefit of the Chaos Gods, though the gods certainly benefit from them. They are performed for knowledge, for the advancement of understanding, for the satisfaction of a curiosity that is so vast and so amoral that it has consumed everything else about the person who possesses it. Bile wants to understand life. He wants to know how it works. He wants to know how it can be improved, modified, broken, and reassembled. And the only way to answer these questions, in Bile's estimation, is to experiment. His subjects are whoever he can get his hands on. Captured humans, captured space marines, captured aliens. He operates on them with techniques that range from crude surgical intervention to sophisticated genetic manipulation. And his experiments are conducted without anesthesia, without consent, and without regard for the suffering they produce. The suffering is not the point. The knowledge is the point. But the suffering is certainly a feature, and Bile has been doing this long enough that he has learned to extract useful data from the screams. The experience of being a subject in Bile's laboratory is, by all accounts, indistinguishable from torture. With the exception that torture is performed for a purpose that the torturer can articulate, and that the victim can, in theory, bring to an end by providing whatever the torturer wants. Bile's experiments have no such endpoint. The experiment continues until the experiment is complete, and the experiment is never complete, because the experiment is knowledge, and knowledge has no limit. Bile's subjects are kept conscious through procedures that would normally require general anesthesia, because Bile wants to observe the subject's reactions, to note the neurological responses to each modification, to catalogue the pain responses and the fear responses and the despair responses as data points in his ongoing research into the nature of biological existence. He does not enjoy the suffering, at least not primarily. He appreciates it the way a musician might appreciate a particularly complex piece of music, recognizing its intricacy without being emotionally moved by it. The New Men, Bile's most ambitious project, are his attempt to create a breed of enhanced human that surpasses even the Space Marines. The project has consumed thousands of subjects over the millennia, each one modified, tested, and discarded when they fail to meet Bile's exacting standards. The failures are not killed. They are kept, catalogued, stored in the laboratories holding pens as reference specimens, living records of experiments that did not produce the desired results. Some of them have been in the pens for centuries, their modified bodies sustained by Bile's biotechnology, their minds deteriorated by centuries of captivity and pain. His creations are legendary. The New Men, his attempts to create a new breed of Space Marine that surpasses the Emperor's original design. The enhanced warriors that he sells to whatever warband or faction can afford his prices. The clones, the copies of famous warriors and leaders that he produces in his laboratories and deploys as soldiers, as experiments, as bargaining chips. Each creation begins with a living subject, a person who is modified, transformed, and rebuilt according to Bile's vision, and each modification is performed on conscious, feeling flesh. The Obliterator virus is a death that does not end. The Obliterator virus is a warp-tainted disease that affects Chaos Space Marines, fusing their bodies with their weapons and their armor, in a progressive, irreversible process that transforms the victim into a living weapons platform. The infected Marine does not simply carry weapons. They become weapons. Their flesh merges with the metal and the mechanisms of their equipment. Their biological systems integrated into the firing chambers and ammunition feeds of the guns that are growing out of their bodies. The process is agonizing. The Marine feels their flesh bonding with the metal, feels the weapons systems rooting into their nervous system, feels their body losing its human form and acquiring a new mechanized shape that is part soldier and part artillery piece. They can feel the ammunition being manufactured inside their body, feel the chemical reactions of the propellant igniting, feel the recoil of the weapons firing through the bones and muscles that are now part of the firing mechanism. The Obliterator retains consciousness. They can think, they can communicate, after a fashion, but they can never return to what they were. The fusion of flesh and weapon is permanent, irreversible, and progressive. The Obliterator continues to change, incorporating new weapons, adapting new configurations, growing more powerful and less human with each passing year. They become massive, bloated, barely mobile mountains of firepower, their original form buried under layers of metal and warp-mutated flesh, their consciousness reduced to a single, all-consuming desire to fire, to kill, to feel the satisfaction that the virus provides when the weapons discharge and the targets are destroyed. The Slaaneshi death is the one that breaks the rules. Slaanesh is the chaos god of excess, of sensation, of the pursuit of experience beyond the limits of endurance. Slaanesh's followers do not merely kill their victims, they experience their victims. They share the dying with them, feeling every sensation that the victim feels, savoring every nuance of the pain and the fear and the despair. And then, because Slaanesh demands excess in all things, they push the experience further, beyond pain, beyond fear, beyond any emotion that has a name. The experience of being captured by Slaanesh's followers is unlike being captured by any other Chaos faction. Khorne's followers kill you. Nurgle's followers infect you. Tzeentch's followers change you. Slaanesh's followers take you somewhere you have never been, somewhere inside your own nervous system, somewhere in the vast unexplored territory of sensation that your brain is capable of processing but that ordinary life never gives you cause to experience. They take you there, and then they leave you there, and you cannot come back. The drugs that Slaanesh followers use are not recreational in any sense that the word implies. They are weapons. Chemical compounds designed to override the brain's normal processing limits and expose the raw, unfiltered capacity of the human nervous system. Under the influence of these compounds, every stimulus is amplified to the point of transcendence. A touch becomes a lightning bolt. A whisper becomes a thunderclap. The sensation of breathing, the simple automatic act that you have performed billions of times without noticing, becomes an experience so intense that it drowns out everything else, filling your consciousness with the awareness of air flowing through passages that you can suddenly feel with an acuteness that makes every molecule of oxygen a separate, distinct, overwhelming event. This is what Slaanesh offers. Not pain, though pain is part of it. Not pleasure, though pleasure is part of it too. Sensation, pure, undiluted, limitless sensation, in quantities that the human brain was never designed to process, and that the human body was never designed to endure. The Emperor's children, the Space Marine Legion that fell to Slaanesh during the heresy, have elevated this pursuit to a level that makes even the other Chaos Legions uncomfortable. They have modified their own nervous systems to heighten their sensitivity to sensation. They have developed weapons, sonic weapons, that destroy their targets not through kinetic force but through sound, through vibrations that resonate with the victim's nervous system and produce sensations that the human brain cannot process. Sensations that are simultaneously pleasure and pain, ecstasy and agony, bliss and torment, all at once, in combinations that shatter the mind and leave the body twitching in a state of overstimulation that is technically alive and functionally destroyed. A person killed by a noise marine does not die in the conventional sense. Their body is intact. Their organs are functional, but their mind is gone, overwhelmed by a flood of sensations so intense that the consciousness has simply turned off, retreating into a catatonic state from which it will never return. The body continues to breathe. The heart continues to beat. But the person, the thinking, feeling, experiencing entity that inhabited that body, has been burned out by an overdose of everything. Slaanesh considers this the purest form of death. Not the death of the body, which is crude and mechanical and uninteresting. The death of the self. The destruction of the capacity to experience, which is, in Slaanesh's estimation, the only thing that makes a person a person. The body is meat. The self is the prize. And when the self has been consumed, when the capacity for sensation has been burned away by an excess of sensation, what remains is not a person, it is a shell, a husk, a reminder of what was lost. There are deaths in the Warhammer 40,000 universe that do not fit neatly into categories. Deaths that are unique to their circumstances. Deaths that happen once and are never repeated. Deaths that are so bizarre and so terrible that the survivors, if there are survivors, cannot describe them coherently. The death of a craft-world Eldar who has lost their spirit stone is one such death. The Eldar's souls are claimed by Slaanesh upon death, consumed by the Dark Prince in an eternity of torment that makes even the homunculi's worst excesses look brief. The Spirit Stone, the crystal that every craft-world Eldar carries from the moment of their birth, is designed to catch the soul at the moment of death, preserving it from Slaanesh's grasp and allowing it to be stored in the craft-world's infinity circuit, a communal psychic matrix where the dead exist in a state of tranquil communion with each other and with the craft-world itself. An Eldar who dies without their spirit stone faces what the Eldar call she who thirsts, and the name is not metaphorical. Slaanesh does not simply consume the Eldar soul. Slaanesh thirsts for it. Slaanesh has been waiting for it since the moment the Eldar was born, since the moment the soul emerged into the material world as a point of light in the warp's darkness. Since the moment Slaanesh's attention fell upon it, and the Dark Prince began to salivate. An Eldar who dies without their spirit stone is doomed. Their soul enters the warp unprotected, and Slaanesh, who has been waiting, who is always waiting, claims it. The soul is not destroyed. It is consumed slowly over an eternity, experienced by the soul as a progressive, never-ending descent into sensation that escalates beyond pleasure, beyond pain, beyond any category that the mortal mind can assign, into a realm of pure, undifferentiated experience that goes on forever and never becomes anything other than what it is. Suffering without end, without purpose, without hope of relief. Every Eldar knows this fate awaits them if they fall in battle without their stone. Every Eldar warrior who walks onto a battlefield carries this knowledge with them. The awareness that a single unlucky shot, a single lost stone, a single moment of carelessness could condemn their soul to an eternity that their worst nightmares cannot adequately represent. It is the background radiation of Eldar existence, the constant low-level terror that shapes every decision, every strategy, every interaction with the universe. The Orc death is, characteristically, the least dignified. Orcs do not fear death. This is not bravery, it is biology. The Orc brain does not process the concept of personal mortality in the way that a human brain does. An Orc who is dying does not experience the existential dread, the awareness of impending non-existence. That makes death terrifying for human beings. An Orc who is dying experiences frustration, irritation, and a faint sense of disappointment that the fight is over. If the Orc died in a good fight, a proper scrap with a worthy opponent, they die satisfied. If they died in a boring way, a stray bullet, a collapsed building, a disease, they die annoyed, and the annoyance is the closest thing to suffering that an orc experiences in their final moments. But the people killed by orcs do not share this equanimity. An orc assault is a wall of green-skinned, screaming, laughing violence that hits like a natural disaster and has about the same regard for individual human life. The orcs do not hate humans. They do not despise them. They enjoy fighting them, in the same way that a human might enjoy a challenging game, and the enjoyment is so genuine, so guileless, so completely devoid of malice, that it makes the violence somehow worse. You are being killed by something that is having fun. Your death is entertainment. Your last moments are the punchline of a joke that your killer finds genuinely hilarious. The War energy that surrounds a large orc force has its own effects on the battlefield. The psychic field that orcs generate collectively, the Gestalt psychic energy that makes their ramshackle technology work and their biological resilience function, can affect non-orc beings in unsettling ways. Humans in close proximity to a large orc War report feelings of irrational aggression, heightened physical energy, and a diminished capacity for fear, as though the orc's own mindset is bleeding into the minds of those around them. For a human soldier, the experience of feeling the orc War pressing against their consciousness, of feeling their own rational fear being suppressed by an alien psychic field that is trying to make them enjoy the fight, is deeply disturbing. And then there are the deaths that the galaxy inflicts without any sentient agency at all. The warp storms that swallow ships whole, trapping them in bubbles of unreality where time does not function and the crew ages centuries in seconds or lives the same moment over and over for eternity. The gravitational anomalies near black holes and neutron stars, where the tidal forces stretch a human body like taffy, the feet pulling away from the head at different rates, the body elongating into a thin strand of matter in a process that physicists call spaghettification, and that the victims, if they could still speak, would call something much less polite. The radiation bursts from dying stars, invisible tsunamis of electromagnetic energy that cook a planet's surface in minutes, killing everything exposed to the sky with a thoroughness that makes exterminators look selective. The void itself kills, if you are exposed to it. The vacuum of space does not, contrary to popular fiction, cause the body to explode. It causes the body to swell, the gases dissolved in the blood, and tissue expanding as the ambient pressure drops. The lungs rupturing if the victim holds their breath, the blood beginning to boil at body temperature as the pressure drops below the threshold where water can exist in liquid form. The victim remains conscious for 10 to 15 seconds, feeling their body swell, feeling the moisture on their eyes and tongue beginning to evaporate, feeling the cold, not the cold of low temperature, but the cold of heat radiating away from the body without being replaced. The insidious, progressive chill of a body that is losing its thermal energy to the infinite heat sink of empty space. They die of oxygen deprivation after about 90 seconds. By then, they have been unconscious for over a minute, and the unconsciousness is a mercy. Because the last 60 seconds of conscious experience in vacuum are among the most terrifying that a human body can endure. The Dark Mechanicum's creations deserve their own examination, because they represent a fusion of technology and cruelty that neither the Imperium nor the Chaos Gods could achieve alone. The Dark Mechanicum are the renegade tech priests who turned to chaos during the Horus Heresy, taking their knowledge of Imperial technology with them into the warp and blending it with the Dark God's power. Their weapons are abominations, machines that should not work by any rational principle of physics, but that function through the application of warp energy to mechanical systems. Daemon engines are their signature creation, weapons platforms that are inhabited by bound daemons. Possessed machines that combine the relentless endurance of technology with the malicious intelligence of a warp entity. A person killed by a daemon engine does not simply die from the mechanical damage. The daemon within the engine feeds on the dying, drawing sustenance from the victim's soul as the machine's weapons destroy their body. The victim experiences a double death: the physical death of their body and the spiritual death of their soul, simultaneously, and the daemon ensures that the spiritual death is worse, because the daemon has been starved, because the daemon is hungry, and because the daemon has been waiting inside its metal prison for exactly this moment. The defilers, the spider-legged daemon engines that the Iron Warriors favor, are particularly terrible. They stride across the battlefield on mechanical legs, their weapons blazing, and within their armored hulls the bound daemons howl with a hunger that is transmitted through the engine's voxcasters as a shrieking, wailing cacophony that drives defenders mad before the engine's weapons even reach them. The sound is not incidental. It is a weapon in itself, a psychic broadcast of the daemon's hunger and rage that penetrates the listener's consciousness and erodes their will to resist. The Soul Grinder, a daemon engine of chaos undivided, is worse still. The Soul Grinder was once a daemon, a warp entity that failed its patron god and was punished by being fused with a mechanical chassis. Trapped in a prison of metal and gears and ammunition feeds, the daemon inside a Soul Grinder is insane with pain and fury, and it takes that pain and fury out on everything it encounters, tearing through fortifications, through armor, through flesh, with a savagery that reflects 10,000 years of imprisonment and an eternity of rage. The warp itself has methods of death that do not require any agent, daemon or otherwise. Warp madness is a slow death. It affects astropaths, navigators, psychers, and anyone else who must interact with the Imperium as part of their duties. The warp erodes sanity the way water erodes stone, gradually, imperceptibly, over years and decades of exposure. An astropath who has been sending and receiving psychic messages for 30 years is not the same person they were when they started. The warp has worn grooves in their mind, channels through which unwanted thoughts and alien impulses flow, and the astropath spends increasing amounts of mental energy shoring up the barriers between their consciousness and the things that whisper on the other side. Eventually, the barriers fail. The astropath begins to hear voices that are not transmissions. They begin to see things that are not visions. They begin to act on impulses that are not their own, performing small, irrational acts that serve no purpose they can identify, but that they feel compelled to perform nonetheless. The acts escalate. The voices get louder. The visions become more vivid. And one day, the astropath does something that they cannot explain. Something terrible. And the Inquisition arrives. And the astropath is taken away. And no one speaks of them again. This is the occupational hazard of psychic service in the Imperium. Every psyker who serves the Emperor knows that their career has an expiration date, a point at which the warp damage becomes too severe for their sanity to survive, and that the expiration date is not marked on any calendar. It arrives when it arrives. The psyker works until the day they break, and then they are disposed of, and the next psyker in the queue takes their place. The Hrud migration is a death by temporal distortion. The Hrud, a Xenos species that the Imperium encounters rarely but remembers always, generate a field of accelerated entropy around themselves. In the vicinity of a Hrud concentration, time moves faster. Metal rusts, wood rots, flesh ages. A human who enters a Hrud-affected zone without protection ages at a rate that compresses decades into minutes, their body deteriorating with a speed that the conscious mind cannot process, their hair graying and their skin wrinkling and their joints stiffening and their organs failing in a cascade of senescence that takes them from youth to old age to death in the time it would normally take to walk across a room. The victim feels every moment. They feel their youth draining away. They feel their strength fading. They feel the accumulation of years, the weight of time, settling onto them like a physical burden that gets heavier with every second. They watch their hands wrinkle. They feel their teeth loosen. They feel the cold that comes with old age. The deep bone-level chill that no amount of warmth can alleviate, settling into their body and refusing to leave. They die of old age, in minutes, and the Hrud do not notice because the aging field is not a weapon. It is simply a byproduct of the Hrud's biological processes, a side effect of their existence that they cannot control and do not understand. The deaths they cause are collateral damage, the equivalent of a human stepping on an ant, except that the ant is a person and the step is the slow, grinding compression of an entire lifetime into a moment that should not contain it. The opening of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, introduced a new category of death to the galaxy. The Great Rift is a tear in reality that stretches across the entire galaxy, a wound in the fabric of space-time that connects the material universe to the warp in a permanent, unhealable breach. When the rift opened, it consumed worlds. Not through invasion, not through bombardment, not through any of the conventional methods of planetary destruction that the Imperium has catalogued and prepared for. It consumed them through exposure. The worlds closest to the rift's path were simply swallowed by the warp, their physical reality dissolving as the Imperium flooded in, their populations experiencing the full, unfiltered chaos of the warp. Without any protection, without any preparation, without any understanding of what was happening to them. The people on those worlds did not die in any conventional sense. They were unmade, their physical bodies dissolved, their consciousness fragmented, their souls were pulled into the warp and scattered across the Imperium, each fragment experiencing its own personalized eternity of torment. Because the warp does not process souls as wholes, it processes them as components, and each component is subjected to its own distinct and customized form of suffering. The worlds on the far side of the rift, the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the Imperium that was cut off from the light of the Astronomicon when the rift opened, face a slower, but no less terrible death. Without the Astronomicon to guide their ships, warp travel in the Imperium Nihilus is even more dangerous than it is in the rest of the galaxy. Without communication, without reinforcement, without the supply chains that the Imperium's infrastructure provides, the worlds of the Nihilus are isolated, alone, and gradually dying. Their populations dwindling as the resources run out and the enemies close in, and the darkness, the literal darkness of a galaxy without the Emperor's light, settles over everything. The people on those worlds wait. They pray to an emperor who cannot hear them, on worlds that the Imperium cannot reach. In a darkness that is not merely metaphorical but physical, the darkness of a sky without stars, without the Astronomican's glow, without the faint, distant hope that somewhere someone knows they exist and is coming to help them. No one is coming. The Imperium has too many problems of its own. The worlds of the Nihilus are, for all practical purposes, abandoned, left to survive or die on their own. And the dying, when it comes, is measured not in battles or invasions, but in the slow, grinding attrition of a civilization that has been cut off from everything that sustained it. The galaxy is creative in its cruelty. This is perhaps the most disturbing truth about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The horror is not limited to the actions of sentient beings. The galaxy itself is hostile. The physics of the universe, warped and corrupted by the presence of the Imperium, produce phenomena that kill in ways that sentient cruelty cannot match. Warp storms that trap ships in timeless bubbles. Radiation from exotic stellar phenomena that rewrites Dina in real time. Gravitational anomalies that compress three-dimensional space into 2 dimensions, flattening everything within them into infinitely thin sheets of matter that retain consciousness for a fraction of a second before the physics complete their work, and the consciousness, along with the matter, becomes a 2-dimensional abstraction that has no room for thought. These are not punishments. They are not designed to cause suffering. They are simply what the universe does. In a galaxy where the laws of physics are suggestions rather than rules, and where the fabric of reality is thin enough that the things on the other side can push through. The galaxy kills in 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways. More ways than any single mind can catalogue, more methods than any single script can describe, more variations than any single storytelling voice can narrate before the listener falls asleep and the voice, wisely, falls silent. We have travelled far tonight. We have descended into the digestion pools of the Tyranids, where a world's population is dissolved into nutrient slurry and pumped into orbit through biological capillary towers. We have entered the laboratories of the homunculi, where victims are kept alive for centuries in states of agony that the human mind should not be able to sustain. We have watched the Geller field fail, and reality flood in, and the crew of a starship transformed into screaming, mutating things that were human a moment ago and are not human anymore. We have seen the chaos spawn, the champion who received too many gifts and lost everything, trapped inside a body of thrashing, uncontrolled flesh. We have breathed the air of a Nurgle plague world, where the dying smile because grandfather has told them everything will be all right. We have watched the Gorse Flayer strip a soldier atom by atom, and the flayed ones skin their victims with surgical precision. We have stood before the penitent engine, where a heretic is wired to a walking weapon and condemned to fight in perpetual agony until the Emperor grants them the mercy of death. We have seen the Astronomican's fuel, the 1,000 souls a day that burn to keep humanity's lighthouse lit. And we have not covered everything. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 contains horrors that we have not touched tonight. Deaths so inventive and so terrible that they would require their own episodes, their own hours of narration, their own whispered recitations in the dark. There are deaths that belong to the void, deaths that happen in the cold, silent emptiness between stars, on ships that are themselves dying. And the experience of dying on a dying ship is unique among the galaxy's horrors. A warship that suffers a critical breach does not simply explode. Not immediately. The breach vents atmosphere, and the crew in the affected sections are exposed to the void. The ones closest to the breach are pulled out, sucked through the gap in the hull and ejected into space, where they experience the vacuum death we described earlier, the swelling, the boiling blood, the frozen suffocation. The ones further from the breach are killed by the pressure differential, their bodies crushed or torn as the air they are breathing is violently ripped toward the gap. But the ones furthest from the breach, the ones in the sections that the emergency bulkheads manage to seal before the atmosphere is completely vented, face a different death. They are trapped. The bulkheads that saved them from the void have also cut them off from the rest of the ship. Their section has no power, no heat, no communication. The air they have will sustain them for hours, maybe a day, depending on the volume of the sealed section and the number of people trapped in it. The temperature will drop as the section radiates its heat into space, and the cold will come slowly, insidiously. The kind of cold that starts in the fingers and toes and works its way inward, numbing the extremities first, then the limbs, then the core, and the people trapped in the sealed section will huddle together for warmth, and they will talk, and they will pray, and they will gradually, gently, quietly freeze to death while the battle rages on outside. Sometimes the rescue teams reach them in time. Sometimes the rescue teams find the sealed section and cut through the bulkhead and find the people inside still alive, still conscious, still hoping. Sometimes, more often, the rescue teams find them frozen, huddled together, peaceful, in a way that the rest of the battlefield is not. The cold death is, by the standards of everything else on this list, almost gentle. It is slow, yes, and the awareness, the knowledge that you are dying, and that the only variable is how long the air will last, is its own form of torment. But there is no violence in it, no malice, no cruelty, just cold and time, and the gradual dimming of consciousness as the body's systems shut down one by one. It is perhaps the kindest death in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And the fact that freezing to death in a sealed compartment while your ship is destroyed around you qualifies as kind tells you everything you need to know about the baseline for suffering in the 41st millennium. Then there are the boarding actions. Space Marine boarding actions are, for the defenders, a particularly concentrated form of hell. The boarding torpedo strikes the enemy hull, boring through the armor with a melter charge, and the Space Marines pour out into the interior of the enemy ship. They are superhuman. They are armored. They are armed with weapons that are designed to kill other superhuman beings. And the ordinary human crew of the defending ship are, by comparison, unarmored, undersized, and equipped with weapons that cannot reliably penetrate the Space Marines' ceramite plate. The fighting in a boarded ship is close, brutal, and one-sided. The corridors are too narrow for the defenders to bring their numbers to bear. The Space Marines' armor makes them effectively immune to most of the defenders' weapons. The bolters that the Space Marines carry are devastating in the enclosed environment, each mass-reactive round detonating inside the target's body and spraying the corridor with the victim's atomized remains. The defenders fight and die, and are replaced by more defenders, and the Space Marines advance through a corridor painted with the blood of everyone who tried to stop them. The crew of a boarded ship know what is coming. They have heard the impact of the boarding torpedo. They have felt the vibration of the melter charge cutting through the hull. They have heard the battle reports from the sections closest to the breach. Reports that got shorter and more desperate with each transmission until they stopped entirely. And they wait. They wait in their sections, behind their improvised barricades with their lasguns and their shotguns and their prayers, and they wait for the sound of ceramite boots in the corridor, and when the sound comes they fight and they die, and the ship falls. The pariah. The blank, the person born without a soul, whose very presence causes those around them to feel an existential dread so profound that it transcends mere fear and enters the realm of metaphysical revulsion. The pariah does not kill, the pariah unmakes. In their presence, faith falters, hope dies, and the fundamental conviction that the universe has meaning is eroded, leaving behind a grey, empty wasteland of purposelessness that is worse than any physical pain. The enslaver plague, the ancient horror from before the fall, the psychic parasites that take control of psychers' minds and use them as gateways to bring more of their kind into reality. The enslavers do not kill their hosts. They use them, riding their consciousness like a vehicle, forcing them to open psychic portals that allow more enslavers to pour through, until the host's mind is so degraded by the parasitic infestation that it simply stops functioning, and the enslaver discards the body and moves on. The Hrud. The Xenos species whose mere presence accelerates the aging process in all organic matter around them. A human in the vicinity of a Hrud concentration ages at a rate that can compress an entire lifetime into hours. They feel themselves growing old, feel their joints stiffening, their vision dimming, their hair graying, their skin wrinkling, their organs failing, the entire process of senescence compressed into a time frame that the conscious mind cannot reconcile with the body's experience. They die of old age in an afternoon, and the Hrud do not even notice, because the aging field is not a weapon. It is simply a byproduct of the Hrud's existence. The galaxy is full of ways to die, full of methods and mechanisms and creatures and weapons and diseases and curses and cosmic forces that can end a human life in ways that range from the instantaneous to the eternal. The 41st millennium is not a safe place. It is not a kind place. It is not a place where death comes gently, or where suffering has a limit, or where the worst that can happen is bounded by the human capacity to imagine the worst. The worst that can happen is always worse than you think. The 41st millennium guarantees it. The universe is an artist, and its medium is pain, and its canvas stretches from one end of the galaxy to the other, and it has been painting for 14 billion years, and it has no intention of stopping. The soldier on the front line does not think about the homunculi, does not think about the chaos spawns or the digestion pools or the Geller field failures. They think about the enemy in front of them, the orc charging across the no-man's land, the Tyranid organism scrambling over the barricade, the traitor in the shadows with the stubber. They think about the immediate, the concrete, the bullet that is going to hit them or miss them in the next 3 seconds. And if the bullet hits and the dying starts, the soldier hopes for the clean death, the bolt round, the direct hit, the instantaneous obliteration that does not give the nervous system time to send its final screaming report. The clean death is the prayer that every Imperial soldier carries into battle alongside their lasgun and their Aquila and their copy of the uplifting primer. Not to survive, not to win, just to die cleanly, if dying is the day's outcome. Most do not get the clean death. Most get something in between, Something worse than the best and better than the worst. A death that takes minutes or hours and that is painful and frightening and alone. Because every death is alone, no matter how many people are dying around you, and somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, in the ruins of a world that was once alive and is now nothing but ash and the fading echo of screams, someone is experiencing the worst right now. Someone is dying in a way that would make everything we have discussed tonight seem merciful. Someone is in a laboratory, or a digestion pool, or a penitent engine, or the grip of something that has no name and no mercy and no intention of letting them go. There is one faction in the galaxy that attempts to wage war without gratuitous cruelty. The Tau, the young species on the eastern fringe, believe in the greater good, in a philosophy that values collective welfare, and that, at least in theory, treats even its enemies with a measure of respect. The Tau do not torture prisoners. They do not desecrate the dead. They do not engage in the elaborate ritualized cruelty that characterizes the Imperium, the Drukhari, and the forces of chaos. The Tau are also losing. Not dramatically. Not immediately. But the Tau Empire, for all its idealism, occupies a tiny fraction of the galaxy. And the galaxy does not reward idealism. The Tau are surrounded by enemies who do not share their values, who do not respect their philosophy, and who regard their restraint not as a virtue but as a weakness to be exploited. The Tau's refusal to embrace cruelty has not made the galaxy more humane. It has made the Tau more vulnerable. This is perhaps the most disturbing lesson that the Warhammer 40,000 universe teaches about suffering. That in a galaxy where cruelty is the norm, mercy is not merely impractical. It is dangerous. The Imperium's brutality is not an aberration. It is an adaptation. The Drukhari's cruelty is not a choice. It is survival. The Chaos God's hunger for suffering is not a weakness. It is the fundamental operating principle of the universe itself. The deaths we have described tonight are not accidents. They are features. They are the natural, inevitable products of a universe that runs on suffering the way a combustion engine runs on fuel. The suffering is not a byproduct of the galaxy's wars. The wars are a mechanism for producing suffering. The entire structure of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, from the Chaos Gods at the top to the last human soul at the bottom, is a machine designed to generate the maximum possible amount of pain, and every faction, every species, every individual who exists within this machine is either a producer of suffering, a consumer of suffering, or both. There is no exit. There is no solution. There is no hero who will ride in and fix the machine, because the machine cannot be fixed. It is working exactly as intended. The galaxy does not stop. The killing does not stop. The suffering does not stop. Because in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war. And war has an infinite capacity for cruelty. And cruelty has an infinite capacity for innovation. And innovation has an infinite capacity for horror. And yet there are people who fight, people who stand against the darkness with nothing but a lasgun and a prayer and the stubborn, irrational conviction that the universe should be better than this. People who face the worst that the galaxy can produce and refuse to break. People who die, sometimes badly, sometimes terribly, sometimes in ways that this script has spent 25,000 words describing, and who go to their deaths with their eyes open and their backs straight and the Emperor's name on their lips. They are not heroes. The Imperium does not produce heroes. The Imperium produces survivors, and the survivors produce more survivors, And the cycle continues generation after generation, millennium after millennium, in a galaxy that offers no mercy and asks for none in return. But they fight. They always fight. The Imperium's own soldiers know these deaths. They know them by name, by reputation, by the stories that veterans tell in the barracks and the trenches and the cargo holds of the ships that carry them to their next deployment. They have a taxonomy of horror, an informal classification system that ranks the galaxy's worst deaths and assigns them nicknames that would mean nothing to a civilian and everything to a soldier who has seen what the nicknames describe. Getting eaten is the Tyranid death, and it occupies a mid-range position in the taxonomy because the eating is at least finite. Getting spagged is the Chaos Spawn transformation, and it ranks near the top because the transformation is permanent. Getting skinned is the Flayed Ones, and it ranks high because the skinning is methodical and the victim is conscious throughout. Getting dissolved is the Virus Bomb, and it ranks highest among the exterminatus methods because the dissolution is progressive and the victim can watch. Getting taken is the Drukhari capture, and it ranks above everything else because getting taken has no end. There is no bottom. There is no point at which the suffering reaches its maximum and begins to diminish. Getting taken is forever. The soldiers discuss these rankings the way they discuss everything else, with dark humor, with profanity, with the gallows comedy that is the universal language of people who live in proximity to death, and who have learned that the only alternative to laughing about it is screaming. They argue about the rankings. They debate the relative merits of being dissolved versus being eaten, of being transformed versus being possessed, of dying fast versus dying slow, as though the discussion is academic, as though the deaths are theoretical, as though the galaxy's worst horrors are problems to be analyzed rather than fates to be feared. But they fear them beneath the humor, beneath the bravado, beneath the cultivated indifference that every soldier develops as armor against the reality of their situation. They fear them. They fear them because they know, with the certainty that comes from experience rather than imagination, that every death on the list is real, that every horror they have discussed has happened to someone, that every nightmare they have described has been lived by a person who was, until the moment the nightmare began, no different from them. The hierarchy extends beyond combat deaths. There are administrative deaths, the deaths that the Imperium inflicts through bureaucratic process rather than military action. The worker who is reassigned to a hazardous manufactorum and dies of chemical exposure within 6 months. The citizen who is conscripted into a penal legion and shot for hesitation during their first engagement. The family that is relocated to a death world colony and killed by the indigenous fauna within a year. These are not accidents. They are policy. They are the Imperium's population management strategy, executed through the Administratum's paper shuffle rather than through the barrel of a gun. The most banal death in the Imperium is the death by mathematics. The Administratum calculates that a given hive level's population exceeds its food allocation by a certain percentage. The food allocation is not increased, because increasing it would require diverting resources from the imperial tithe. The excess population dies of malnutrition, of the diseases that malnutrition enables, of the violence that desperation produces. The deaths are documented. The population adjustment is filed. The tithe is met. No one is killed. Everyone dies. The distinction is important to the administratum, which processes deaths by policy differently from deaths by action, and the distinction allows the bureaucrats who implement the policies to sleep at night if their hab blocks are quiet enough to sleep in, which they usually are not. They could be next. Any of them could be next. And the knowledge that the galaxy contains so many varieties of suffering, so many flavors of death, so many ways to end a human life that are worse than anything any single mind could invent, is the constant, unspoken companion of every soldier, every sailor, every imperial servant who ventures beyond the relative safety of their homeworld and into the darkness between the stars. And that, in the end, is the only answer the galaxy has to the horror it contains. It is not enough. It has never been enough. It will never be enough. Because the forces arrayed against humanity are infinite and the forces defending it are finite. And the math has never worked and never will work, and every battle the Imperium wins is a temporary reprieve in a war that has no winning condition. But they fight anyway. Because the alternative is the digestion pool. The alternative is the homunculus's table. The alternative is the Geller field failure. The alternative is the chaos spawn's endless, thrashing agony, or the penitent engine's perpetual torment, or the slow dissolution of a virus-bombed world, or the quiet, insidious decay of a Nurgle plague, or the atom-by-atom erasure of a Gorse flare, or the centuries of captivity in Comora's deepest dungeons. The alternative is every death we have described tonight, and every death we have not described, and every death that the galaxy has not yet invented but will, given time, because the galaxy is creative and cruelty is its medium. They fight because the fight is all they have, not the victory, not the hope of victory. Just the fight itself, the stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to submit to a universe that demands silent, grateful submission. The refusal to die quietly when the universe demands quiet death. The refusal to accept that suffering is all there is when every single piece of evidence available to mortal consciousness suggests that suffering is, in fact, all there is. But it is all there is. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the grimness is the message. Perhaps the catalogue of horrors that we have assembled tonight. The digestion pools and the pain engines and the Gorse flayers and the virus bombs and the Geller field failures and the chaos spawns and the penitent engines and the soul-draining Astronomicon and the endless institutional cruelty of an Imperium that treats its own people as disposable resources. Perhaps all of it is asking a question that the lore does not answer directly, but that sits beneath every story, every codex entry, every piece of fiction that Games Workshop has ever produced. Is it worth it? Is the survival of the human species worth the cost? Is the continuation of humanity in this degraded, brutalized, horrifying form, in a galaxy that seems purpose-built to maximize suffering, worth the individual cost that every human being in the Imperium pays? Is the Emperor's vision, whatever it was, whatever it has become, worth the trillion souls that have been fed to the Astronomicon to sustain it? Worth the billions dissolved in virus bombs to protect it? Worth the millions tortured in Comora? Worth the billions consumed by the Tyranids? Worth the uncountable masses who have lived and died in hive cities without ever seeing the sky? The Imperium says yes. The Imperium always says yes. Because the alternative is extinction. And extinction is the one answer the Imperium refuses to give. And the people, the billions upon billions of ordinary people who live inside this machine of suffering and who are ground down by its operations, and who feed their dead to the corpse starch processors and send their children to the manufactorums and pray to an emperor who may or may not hear them, the people also say yes. Not because they have been persuaded, not because they agree, not because they have been given a fair choice and have weighed the options and concluded that this is the best available outcome. They say yes because they are human, and humans endure. It is what they do, it is what they have always done, it is what they will continue to do, in the grim darkness of the far future, for as long as there is a far future to endure. The dying never stops, but neither does the living. And that, when you strip away the horror and the darkness and the endless, industrialized cruelty, is the story that Warhammer 40,000 is telling. A story about endurance. A story about the stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal of the human species to die quietly when the universe is screaming at them to die loudly. It is not a happy story. It was never meant to be a happy story. But it is a story about humans. And that, above all else, makes it worth telling. Good night.